Betrayal trauma. You tell someone everything. The fears you don't admit to anyone else. The mistakes you still regret. The version of yourself you've worked hard to protect. They listen. They understand. They tell you you're safe with them. And then one day you find out they've been lying the entire time. The shock doesn't come from what they did. It comes from who they were. Someone you trusted. Someone who had access to the parts of you no one else sees. That's betrayal trauma. A wound that cuts deeper than ordinary hurt because it doesn't just damage the relationship. It damages your sense of reality itself. When betrayal comes from someone close, your mind struggles to process it. You built your understanding of the world around this person. You made decisions based on the assumption that they were honest, that their care was real. Now that foundation collapses. Suddenly every memory feels unstable. Did they ever mean what they said? Were you wrong about them from the beginning? Your mind loops through these questions, trying to restore coherence to something that no longer makes sense. Here's what makes it worse. The bond that once held you together now works against you. The same instincts that signaled safety now trigger confusion. Your body still expects comfort from the person who hurt you, but your mind knows better. That contradiction creates a split where part of you still wants to trust them, even after everything. It happens in relationships when a partner hides an affair. Not just breaking a promise, but rewriting months or years of intimacy into a performance. It happens in friendships when someone you confided in uses your vulnerabilities against you, turning trust into leverage. It happens in families when a parent prioritizes their image over your well-being, making you question whether you were ever truly seen. It happens at work when a mentor takes credit for your ideas, transforming what felt like mentorship into exploitation. The damage isn't just emotional. Betrayal trauma disrupts your ability to trust your own judgment. If you were that wrong about someone so central to your life, how can you trust yourself to see anyone clearly again? That doubt doesn't fade. It lingers long after the relationship ends, shaping how you interpret future connections and whether you let anyone get close. What makes it unbearable is that the person who hurt you was also the person you would have turned to for comfort. They occupied both roles, the wound and the expected healer. Now there's nowhere safe to process the pain because the relationship that should have held you is the same one that broke you. Trust violation. How much of your life depends on invisible agreements? You assume the people around you mean what they say. You assume their actions align with their words. You assume that when someone commits to something, they'll follow through. Most of the time, these assumptions hold. And then they don't. A trust violation isn't just disappointment. It's the moment you realize someone deliberately chose their interest over the unspoken contract between you. They knew what was expected. They knew what breaking it would cost you. They did it anyway. Trust exists because it reduces uncertainty. You don't have to verify every claim or second-guess every intention. You operate on the assumption that the other person will act in predictable, reliable ways. When that assumption breaks, the cost isn't just the specific betrayal. It's the sudden weight of uncertainty flooding back into every interaction. Someone promises to keep a secret, then shares it the moment it benefits them. A partner swears fidelity while maintaining a hidden relationship. A colleague agrees to support your project, then quietly undermines it to advance their own position. A friend borrows money with genuine-sounding repayment plans, then avoids you when the deadline passes. The violation isn't just in the act. It's in the deliberate deception that preceded it. What separates a trust violation from an honest mistake is intent. Mistakes happen when someone tries and fails. Violations happen when someone calculates the risk, weighs your trust against their advantage, and chooses themselves while pretending otherwise. That calculation is what makes it unforgivable. Not the outcome, but the awareness behind it. The aftermath follows a pattern. First, disbelief. You replay the moments leading up to the revelation, searching for signs you missed. Then anger. Not just at what happened, but at the time you wasted believing a performance. Then the slow, grinding work of recalibrating. Every shared memory now carries a question mark. Every promise they made gets re-examined under harsher light. Trust violations teach you that sincerity can be faked. That warmth doesn't guarantee honesty. That someone can look you in the eye and lie without hesitation. Once you learn that lesson, you can't unlearn it. It changes the way you listen to people, the way you interpret their reassurances, the way you decide who gets access to the unguarded parts of your life. The cruelest part is that trust violations don't just destroy one relationship. They contaminate future ones. You meet someone new, someone who hasn't done anything wrong, and you still brace for the moment they reveal themselves. You track inconsistencies that might mean nothing. You hold back parts of yourself, not because they've earned your distrust, but because someone else taught you what trust costs when it's misplaced. And so the violation echoes forward. It becomes a filter you see every new relationship through. A reflex you can't entirely control. Because once you know how easily trust can be weaponized, you can't stop scanning for the signs that it's happening again. Duplicity. Some people live two lives. Not in the dramatic sense. Not double agents or secret identities. Just the ordinary version. The face they show you and the one they keep hidden. They laugh at your jokes, offer reassurance when you're struggling, act like they're on your side. And behind that, in conversations you'll never hear, they undermine you. Mock you. Use what you shared against you. This is duplicity, not just lying. It's sustained performance. A deliberate split between what someone presents and what they actually do. The gap between their public alignment with you and their private agenda. Duplicity works because it hijacks social trust. You expect consistency. When someone acts friendly, you assume friendship. When they show concern, you assume care. That assumption creates a blind spot. You don't look for contradictions because the surface feels coherent. They know this. They count on it. A coworker praises your work in meetings, then quietly takes credit with management. A friend listens sympathetically to your problems, then repeats them as gossip framed to make you look unstable. A partner reassures you everything is fine while planning an exit they'll only reveal once it's irreversible. The duplicity isn't in the single lie. It's in the sustained maintenance of two incompatible realities. What makes it effective is timing. The reveal almost never comes from them. You find out through someone else, through leaked messages, through consequences that don't make sense until you trace them back. By then, the damage is done. They've already secured what they wanted. Your trust. Your information. Your position. Your emotional investment. Duplicity leaves you questioning every interaction. You replay conversations, searching for the moments where the mask slipped. You wonder how long they were managing both versions. How much of what felt real was calculation. The humiliation comes not just from being deceived, but from realizing you were performing for an audience that was never genuine. The worst part is how it spreads. Once you've experienced sustained duplicity, you start looking for it everywhere. A compliment feels like strategy. Support feels conditional. Kindness feels rehearsed. You can't take people at face value anymore because you've learned that faces can be constructed specifically to deceive you. Backstabbing. They were supposed to be on your side. You worked together. You covered for them. You shared credit, shared resources, shared the kind of information you only give to people you assume have your back. And then, when it mattered, when loyalty actually meant something, they turned. Not to your face. Behind you, where you couldn't see it coming or defend yourself. That's backstabbing. Not disagreement. Not honest conflict. It's deliberate sabotage disguised as alliance. The violation happens in the gap between what they showed you and what they did when you weren't looking. It works through asymmetry. You're operating under one set of rules: transparency, mutual support, shared goals. They're operating under another: opportunism, self-preservation, calculated positioning. By the time you realize the rules were never the same, they've already made their move. A colleague smiles through a project, then poisons your reputation in a meeting you weren't invited to. A friend agrees to keep something private, then uses it as currency the moment sharing it advances their standing. A business partner nods along to your strategy, then pitches it as their own to investors before you get the chance. The damage isn't just in the action. It's in the fact that you trusted them enough to turn your back. What separates backstabbing from ordinary betrayal is position. They weren't strangers. They were inside your defenses. You gave them proximity information trust because you believed the alliance was real. They used that access not to support you but to strike from the one angle you couldn't guard. The aftermath leaves you exposed, not just to the person who betrayed you, but to everyone who witnessed it. Backstabbing often happens in front of an audience. That's part of the design. They don't just want to take from you. They want to be seen taking from you. To signal to others that you're vulnerable, that your position isn't as secure as it seemed, that aligning with you might not be the safest move. You can't undo what's been said or done. You can confront them, but by then the damage is public. The trust is destroyed. And worse, you're left with a question that doesn't have a clean answer. Were they always planning this, or did the opportunity just present itself and they took it? Either way, the alliance you thought you had was never what you believed it to be. Betrayal blindness. You see it happening. Not all at once, but in pieces. Small inconsistencies. Stories that don't quite line up. Behavior that feels slightly off. But instead of confronting it, you explain it away. You tell yourself you're reading too much into things. That you're being paranoid. That if something were really wrong, it would be more obvious. So you ignore the signals and keep trusting them. This is betrayal blindness. The mind's refusal to register betrayal even when evidence is accumulating. It's not stupidity. It's not weakness. It's a protective mechanism that misfires. Your mind suppresses the warning signs because acknowledging them would be too destabilizing. The mechanism evolved for a reason. When you depend on someone for survival, for resources, for emotional stability, recognizing their betrayal creates a crisis. If you're a take to them, if leaving isn't a simple option, your mind faces an impossible choice. Accept the threat and destabilize your foundation, or suppress the threat and maintain the relationship. Often, suppression wins. A partner's phone habits change. They're suddenly protective of their messages, vague about their schedule. You notice, but instead of questioning it, you rationalize. They're stressed. They need privacy. You're overthinking. The inconsistencies keep building, but each one gets absorbed into the narrative you've constructed to avoid the conclusion. A business partner starts excluding you from decisions. Key conversations happen without you. Documents you used to see first now arrive after the fact. You feel the shift. But you tell yourself it's efficiency. They're handling things. You trust them to keep you informed. By the time you realize you've been systematically cut out, the structure has already changed around you. Betrayal blindness doesn't mean you don't see the evidence. It means you see it and your mind immediately generates an alternative explanation. One that lets you keep believing the relationship is safe. The betrayal doesn't have to hide. It just has to give you enough ambiguity to construct a version of reality where it isn't happening. What breaks the blindness is usually something undeniable. A message you weren't supposed to see. A third party confirming what you've been dismissing. Evidence so direct that no rationalization can absorb it. And when the blindness lifts, the betrayal doesn't feel new. It feels like something you've been carrying the entire time without letting yourself know it. The worst part is the self-blame. You knew. Some part of you always knew. You just refused to let yourself act on it. And now you're left wondering how long you participated in your own deception and what that cost you while you kept your eyes closed. Covert hostility. They never say it outright. There's no argument. No confrontation. On the surface, everything seems fine. But underneath, in the small gestures, the tone, the things they don't do, there's something else. A coldness. A withdrawal. A quiet refusal that never gets named but always gets felt. Covert hostility is aggression that hides behind plausible deniability. It's not loud. It's not obvious. It operates in the space between what's said and what's meant, between what's done and what's withheld. The hostility is real, but it never declares itself, so you can't confront it without looking unreasonable. It works because it exploits social norms. Direct conflict is visible. It can be addressed. Covert hostility stays beneath that threshold. Just subtle enough that calling it out feels like overaction. They agree to help but drag their feet. They say supportive things but their tone suggests otherwise. They're present but emotionally absent. And when you bring it up they act confused. You're imagining things. They didn't mean it that way. You're being too sensitive. A family member smiles through dinner but refuses to engage with you directly. Responds to your questions with one-word answers. Talks warmly to everyone else at the table. You feel the exclusion, but it's never explicit enough to challenge without seeming paranoid. A teammate agrees to collaborate but misses deadlines, forgets to loop you in, gives you incomplete information. When you address it, they apologize, say they've been overwhelmed. Promise to do better. Then the pattern repeats. The hostility isn't in any single action. It's in the accumulation of small refusals dressed as accidents. A partner withdraws affection but denies anything is wrong. They're tired. They're busy. They need space. The warmth that used to be automatic now requires effort to access, and even then it feels conditional. You're left trying to solve a problem they insist doesn't exist. The cruelty of covert hostility is that it isolates you twice. First, in the relationship where you're being quietly punished but can't name why. Second, in your own mind, where you start doubting whether the hostility is even real. You question your perceptions. Maybe you're oversensitive. Maybe you're projecting. The hostility stays hidden just well enough that you can't be sure, and that uncertainty is part of how it maintains control. What makes it unbearable is the inability to resolve it. You can't fix a problem the other person won't acknowledge. You can't repair a relationship when the damage is being done through absence and withdrawal rather than presence and action. So you stay in this liminal space, feeling the hostility but never able to address it directly, slowly eroding under pressure you're not supposed to notice. Infidelity Psychology. The affair isn't about desire. Not really. It's about compartmentalization. The ability to split your life into separate chambers, where one version of you exists in one relationship and another version operates somewhere else. And the remarkable thing is how natural it feels to the person doing it. Not like deception. Like balance. This is infidelity psychology. The mental architecture that allows someone to maintain parallel emotional lives without experiencing the contradiction as unbearable. It's not that they don't care about the primary relationship. It's that they've developed the capacity to care about both, separately, in ways that never have to reconcile. The mechanism works through justification loops. Every relationship has friction, unmet needs, moments of disconnect. Those become the scaffolding for permission. They tell themselves their partner isn't meeting them emotionally, or physically, or intellectually. The affair becomes compensation, not violation. A way of getting what's missing without disrupting what's stable. And the separation is surgical. The person they are with their partner stays intact. Attentive. Functional. They still show up to family dinners, still remember anniversaries, still say the right things. The affair occupies a different mental compartment. Different rules. Different version of the self. The two don't bleed into each other because they're processed as entirely separate realities. What makes it sustainable is selective empathy. They can imagine their partner's pain in the abstract, but they don't let themselves sit with it. They avoid the full weight of what discovery would do. Instead, they focus on the present. The immediate gratification. The version of themselves that feels more alive, more desired, more seen. That version crowds out the guilt before it can take hold. The collapse happens when the compartments fail. A message seen by accident. A pattern noticed. A lie that doesn't hold. Suddenly the two realities collide, and the person who managed to keep them separate can't anymore. The justification structure crumbles. And what's left is the recognition that they weren't balancing two relationships. They were sustaining one at the cost of honesty in both. The cruelest part is how long the illusion can hold. Not just for the partner being betrayed, but for the person doing the betraying. They genuinely believe they're managing it, that they can keep both worlds alive without damage, until the moment it all comes apart, and they're left facing the version of themselves they kept hidden, even from their own awareness. Loyalty conflict. What happens when the person you're loyal to asks you to betray someone else? Not directly. Not in those words. But the expectation is clear. You're supposed to choose. Your friend or your partner. Your family or your colleague. Your principles or the relationship. And whichever you pick, you lose something. That's loyalty conflict. The impossible position where staying loyal to one person requires disloyalty to another. And the pressure doesn't come from strangers. It comes from the people who matter most, which is exactly why it works. The conflict operates through competing obligations. You owe your partner honesty, but your friend confided in you with the expectation of privacy. You owe your employer discretion, but your family expects transparency about what's affecting you. You owe your sibling solidarity, but your spouse expects you to prioritize the marriage. Each obligation is real. Each carries weight, and they're pulling in opposite directions. A partner asks you to cut off a friendship they see as a threat. The friendship is innocent, but refusing feels like choosing the friend over the relationship. Complying feels like abandoning someone who's done nothing wrong. Either way, you're betraying trust. Just a question of whose. A parent demands you take their side in a family conflict. Staying neutral feels like abandoning them. Taking a side means damaging your relationship with a sibling. You can't preserve both. The family forces you to pick, and the act of picking becomes the betrayal. A manager pressures you to undermine a coworker to secure your own position. Refusing risks your career. Complying means sabotaging someone who trusted you as an ally. The conflict isn't between right and wrong. It's between two relationships that can't coexist under the current terms. What makes loyalty conflict unbearable is that there's no clean resolution. You can't satisfy both sides. Whichever choice you make, you're proving to someone that your loyalty has limits. And once that boundary is visible, the relationship changes. They know now that under the right pressure, you'll choose something else over them. The aftermath leaves you isolated in a specific way. You've either betrayed someone to preserve a relationship, and now you carry the guilt, or you've refused to betray them and damaged the relationship that demanded your loyalty. Either way, you're left knowing that loyalty, when tested, isn't the absolute you thought it was. It's conditional, contextual, and that knowledge sits heavy long after the conflict passes. Secret alliance. They meet your eyes across the room and something shifts. Not attraction. Recognition. You're both seeing the same thing that no one else notices. The hypocrisy. The performance. the gap between what's being said and what's actually happening. And in that moment, without a word, you form an alliance. Secret alliances operate below the surface of official relationships. They're the informal coalitions that exist because two people share a perspective the larger group doesn't. A frustration, a goal, a target. The alliance doesn't announce itself. It works through glances, through coded language, through decisions that seem independent but aren't. The power comes from asymmetry. The group doesn't know the alliance exists, so they can't account for it. They think they're dealing with individuals making separate choices. They don't see the coordination, the shared strategy, the way two people are quietly working toward the same outcome while appearing neutral. Two coworkers recognize that a manager is favoring certain employees unfairly. They don't complain publicly. Instead, they start comparing notes, sharing information, building a case. The alliance gives them leverage they wouldn't have alone. But it only works because it stays hidden. Two family members see through a relative's manipulation. They don't confront it openly. That would trigger defense, denial, conflict. Instead, they create a separate channel. Text threads the rest of the family doesn't see. Private conversations where they validate each other's perceptions. The alliance becomes a refuge from the larger dynamic they can't change. Two friends in a larger social group notice that someone is being quietly excluded. They make a point of including that person, not conspicuously. Just consistent small gestures. Invitations. Check-ins. The alliance operates as a counterweight to the group's drift, but it stays invisible to avoid becoming a confrontation. The danger is that secret alliances, even when formed for protection or justice, create new asymmetries. The people outside the alliance sense something but can't name it. They feel the coordination without seeing the mechanism. And that gap breeds suspicion, paranoia, a sense that decisions are being made in rooms they're not part of. When the alliance is eventually discovered, it's rarely received as neutral coordination. It's seen as conspiracy, betrayal of the group. Even if the alliance formed in response to real problems, the secrecy itself becomes the issue. Because once people know there was a hidden layer of loyalty operating beneath the visible one, every past interaction gets reinterpreted. Were they ever genuine? Or was it always strategy? Relational rupture. You used to talk every day. Now weeks pass in silence. You used to feel easy around them. Now every interaction feels strained. You didn't have a fight. There wasn't a specific moment where everything broke. It just started fraying, and neither of you stopped it. And at some point, the connection you used to rely on wasn't there anymore. Relational rupture doesn't always announce itself with conflict. Sometimes it's quiet. A gradual withdrawal. A mutual retreat that neither person names until the distance is already irreversible. The rupture starts small. A conversation that feels slightly off. A boundary set that wasn't there before. A topic that used to be safe suddenly isn't. At first, it feels like a temporary shift. Stress. Life getting complicated. But the shift doesn't reverse. It deepens. And instead of addressing it, both people start adjusting around it. Messages get shorter. Responses slower. Plans that used to happen automatically now require deliberate effort. The effort starts to feel like evidence. If the relationship was still solid, it wouldn't take this much work to maintain. So you pull back a little more, and they interpret that as confirmation that you're pulling away, and they match it. The rupture feeds itself. A friendship cools after one person gets into a serious relationship. They're not cutting you off. They're just less available, less responsive. You tell yourself it's natural. People's lives change. But underneath, you're hurt. You start mirroring the distance. Now both of you are waiting for the other to close the gap, and neither of you does. A family relationship fractures after a disagreement that never gets resolved. It wasn't a huge fight, just different values surfacing at the wrong time. No one apologized. No one circled back. And now the relationship exists in a space of careful avoidance. You still show up to gatherings, but the ease is gone. You're polite. Distant. The rupture didn't break the relationship. It just drained the warmth out of it. A work partnership deteriorates after a project goes badly. No one's officially at fault, but there's blame in the air. Instead of clearing it, you both start communicating through others. Emails instead of conversations. Formal instead of collaborative. The rupture turns what used to be a team into a transactional arrangement. The hardest part is that ruptures don't demand resolution the way open conflict does. A fight forces confrontation. Rupture just lingers. And the longer it sits, the harder it becomes to address. Because now you're not just dealing with the original fracture. You're dealing with all the months of silence. All the times one of you could have reeked out and didn't. The rupture becomes its own history, and repairing it means acknowledging how long you both let it go. False loyalty signaling. They're the first to defend the group. The loudest voice in meetings. Always emphasizing unity, shared values, collective goals. They position themselves as the most loyal, the most committed, the person everyone can count on, and it works. People trust them, confide in them. Assume their allegiance is absolute, which makes it easier when they betray that trust, because no one saw it coming. False loyalty signaling is performance disguised as principle. It's not actual commitment. It's the appearance of commitment used to secure position, access, and credibility that will later be leveraged for personal gain. The strategy works through overcompensation. Someone genuinely loyal doesn't have to constantly announce it. But someone performing loyalty makes it visible. They're vocal about their dedication. They publicly criticize disloyalty in others. They frame themselves as the standard bearer. And that performance creates a shield. People assume that someone who talks that much about loyalty wouldn't be the one to violate it. A team member constantly emphasizes company values in meetings. Talks about how important trust and collaboration are. Volunteers for extra work to demonstrate commitment. Then quietly takes credit for a colleague's ideas in a conversation with leadership. The false signaling wasn't preparation for one specific betrayal. It was insurance, a way of ensuring that when the betrayal happens, they have enough credibility built up that people doubt the accusation. A friend makes a point of being the person who always shows up, always available, always supportive. They build a reputation as the most reliable person in the group. Then they use that trust to extract favors, borrow money they don't repay, or quietly turn others against someone when it benefits them. The loyalty they perform becomes the reason people don't believe they'd do harm. A partner constantly reassures you of their commitment. Talks about how much the relationship means. How they'd never do anything to jeopardize it. And the reassurance feels good until you realize it was covering something. The affair. The financial deception. The exit plan they were building while promising permanence. The words were insurance against suspicion, not evidence of loyalty. What makes false loyalty signaling effective is timing. The performance happens long before the betrayal. By the time the violation occurs, the person has banked so much visible loyalty that the betrayal feels impossible. People rationalize it, minimize it, assume there's been a misunderstanding, because the version of the person they constructed through signaling doesn't match the action. And reconciling that gap takes longer than the betrayer needs to secure whatever they were after. The damage isn't just in the betrayal itself. It's in the way the false signaling reframes every prior interaction. All those declarations of loyalty weren't connection. They were setup. Strategy disguised as sincerity. And once you see that, you can't separate the performance from the person anymore. Alliance switching. You thought they were with you. You built strategy assuming they'd hold the line. You made decisions based on the belief that when it mattered, they'd be on your side. And then the pressure shifted. The incentives changed. And without warning, without apology, they turned. Not against you in some dramatic confrontation. Just quietly realigned. Started supporting the position they were opposing a week ago. Started undermining the plan they helped create. And suddenly you're exposed in ways you never prepared for. Alliance switching is the calculated abandonment of one coalition for another when the cost-benefit analysis tips. It's not betrayal driven by emotion or principle. It's opportunism. A recognition that the alliance you're in is no longer the winning one, and the faster you switch, the better your position in the new structure. The mechanics are simple. Alliances exist because they serve mutual interest, shared goals, shared threats, shared resources, but those conditions aren't static. When the landscape shifts, when power redistributes, when a new coalition offers better outcomes, loyalty becomes a liability. The person who switches first minimizes their losses. The person who switches last gets punished for their former allegiance. A colleague who supported your proposal in early meetings suddenly goes quiet when leadership signals resistance. By the next meeting, they're suggesting modifications that align with the resistance. By the meeting after that, they're actively distancing themselves from the original plan. The switch isn't dramatic. It's incremental. Quiet repositioning that leaves you defending a position alone that used to be shared. A business partner who was aligned with your vision changes tone once a larger investor expresses different priorities. They don't announce the switch. They just start framing things differently. Suggesting compromises that favor the investor. Reinterpreting decisions you made together as if they were always uncertain. The alliance you thought was solid dissolves into a memory of something that never had the foundation you believed it did. A friend who was firmly in your corner during a group conflict shifts when the social cost becomes clear. They start hedging, making neutral comments, eventually siding with the other perspective in ways that rewrite their earlier support. The switch isn't a dramatic reversal. It's a slow drift that accelerates once they sense which way the group is moving. What makes alliance switching particularly destabilizing is its effect on everyone else. Once one person switches, others start calculating. If the alliance is breaking, staying loyal becomes risky. The switch creates a cascade. The first person to leave signals weakness. The second person confirms it. By the third, the old alliance is dead, and everyone's repositioning to minimize damage. The cruelty is that the person who switches isn't punished. Often they're rewarded. They read the room correctly. They adapted. They prioritized survival over sentiment. Meanwhile, the person who stayed loyal is left holding a position that's no longer viable, with allies who evaporated the moment the terms changed. And the lesson it teaches is brutal. Loyalty is a bet. And sometimes the smart move is knowing when to fold. Emotional infidelity. Can you betray someone without ever touching another person? Without a single physical boundary crossed? The answer is yes. Because infidelity isn't just about bodies. It's about where you direct your emotional energy. The parts of yourself you share. The intimacy you withhold from one relationship to invest in another. Emotional infidelity is the diversion of connection. You're still physically present in your primary relationship, but emotionally you're somewhere else. With someone who understands you better. Someone easier to talk to. Someone who makes you feel seen in ways your partner doesn't anymore. And the shift happens so gradually that by the time you notice, the emotional center of your life has already relocated. It starts with conversation. You meet someone who gets your humor, who asks the right questions, who listens in a way that feels rare. At first, it's just refreshing. A good connection. Nothing inappropriate. But then you start sharing things. Not the surface details. The real stuff. The frustrations you don't mention at home. The dreams you stop talking about. the version of yourself you've been keeping quiet. The connection deepens. You start thinking about this person when they're not around. Checking your phone to see if they've messaged. Feeling a small lift when their name appears. Your mood becomes tied to their availability. And here's the sign that it's crossed into infidelity. You start comparing. Your partner doesn't make you feel this way anymore. This other person does. And instead of addressing what's missing at home, you let the outside connection fill it. A spouse starts confiding in a coworker instead of their partner. The coworker becomes the first person they tell when something happens. The person whose opinion matters most. The partner at home gets the logistics, the calendar, the bills. But the emotional substance, the part that builds intimacy, is being shared elsewhere. A partner develops a close friendship that operates with the intensity of a relationship. Late-night texts. Inside jokes. Emotional support that used to flow to their significant other now flows here. They're not lying about the friendship, but they're also not being honest about what it's replacing. What makes emotional infidelity insidious is the denial. There's no physical evidence, no technical line crossed. So it's easy to tell yourself it's innocent, just a friendship, just talking. But the person on the other side of your primary relationship feels it. The withdrawal, the distance, the sense that they're competing for your attention with someone who's already won. The betrayal isn't in the connection itself. It's in the secrecy. The way you protect it, the way you downplay it when asked, the way you'd feel if your partner saw the messages, even though nothing in them is explicitly inappropriate. That discomfort is the tell. If it were truly innocent, transparency wouldn't feel like a threat. Boundary betrayal. You told them what you needed. Not in a vague way. Clearly. Directly. This is my boundary. This is what I'm not okay with. And they agreed. Said they understood. Said they'd respect it. Then, when it mattered, when honoring that boundary became inconvenient, they didn't. And when you confronted them, they acted like you were overreacting. Boundary betrayal is the violation of limits you explicitly set and the other person explicitly accepted. It's not miscommunication. It's not a misunderstanding. It's a choice to prioritize their comfort, their desires, their convenience over the line you drew. Boundaries exist to protect safety. Emotional, physical, relational. When you set one, you're saying, beyond this point, I'm harmed. Respecting that boundary is the foundation of trust. Violating it is a statement. Your limit matters less than what I want. You tell a partner you're not comfortable with certain behaviors around your ex. They agree. Then at a party, they ignore the boundary entirely. Joke with your ex. Share details about your relationship. Act like the conversation you had never happened. When you bring it up later, they minimize it. It wasn't a big deal. You're being too sensitive. The boundary wasn't actually violated because they didn't mean it the way you took it. You set a limit with a family member about unsolicited advice on your life choices. They nod. Say they understand. Then the next time you're together, they're back at it. Questioning your decisions. Pushing their perspective. Acting like the boundary you set was a suggestion they're free to ignore. And when you remind them, they act hurt. They're just trying to help. You're being unfair. You establish a work boundary with a manager. No contact on weekends unless it's an emergency. They agree in the moment. Then Friday night, your phone lights up. A non-urgent question. A request that could wait until Monday. And when you don't respond immediately, there's tension. The boundary you set is treated as optional. A preference they can override when it suits them. What makes boundary betrayal particularly damaging is the gaslighting that often follows. The person who violated the boundary reframes it. You're too rigid, too controlling, too sensitive. The problem isn't that they crossed the line. It's that you drew one in the first place, and now you're left defending a boundary that should have been respected without question. The betrayal compounds over time. Each violation chips away at your willingness to set boundaries at all. Because what's the point of drawing a line if the other person is just going to step over it and then blame you for making an issue out of it? Eventually, you stop setting them. Not because your needs changed, but because enforcing them became more exhausting than the violation itself. Confidentiality betrayal. Some things are shared with the understanding that they stay private. Not because they're shameful, not because they're secrets, but because they're vulnerable, personal. The kind of information you only give to someone you trust not to spread it. And then you find out they did. Confidentiality betrayal is the breaking of an implicit or explicit agreement to keep something private. It's not just gossip. It's the weaponization of trust. The person you confided in took what you shared and used it in ways you never authorized. For their entertainment. For their advantage. For their connection with someone else at your expense. The agreement doesn't always have to be spoken. Some contexts create automatic expectations of privacy, therapy, friendship, partnership. When you share something sensitive in those spaces, the default assumption is discretion. Violating that isn't a misunderstanding. It's a betrayal of the relational contract. You tell a friend about a struggle you're going through, something you're not ready to share widely. They listen. They seem supportive. Then a week later, you find out they've told other people. Not maliciously, just casually, as a story, as context in a conversation. They didn't think it was that big a deal. But it was your information to control, and they gave it away without asking. You share something personal with a partner in a moment of vulnerability, a fear, an insecurity, a part of your past you don't talk about often. Later, during an argument, they bring it up. Not to understand you better, to hurt you, to win the fight. The thing you trusted them with becomes a weapon the moment it's useful. A colleague confides in you about a work issue. You're in a meeting later, and without thinking, you reference it. Not by name, but enough that anyone paying attention can connect the dots. You justified it as relevant. But you didn't ask. You didn't check if it was okay to share. You just assumed your need to contribute to the conversation outweighed their need for privacy. The damage isn't just in the exposure. It's in the realization that your trust was conditional. The person you confided in valued something else more than keeping your confidence. Whether that was social currency, relational leverage, or just the ease of not having to think about discretion, they chose it over protecting what you shared. Confidentiality betrayal changes the way you confide in people. Not just with the person who betrayed you, but with everyone. You start withholding, keeping things surface level. Because once you've learned that trust can be broken this casually, you stop assuming it will hold. And the cost isn't just one relationship. It's your willingness to be vulnerable at all. Triangulated betrayal. There are 3 of you in this relationship, but you didn't know it until too late. You thought you were dealing with one person directly. Honest communication. Clear terms. But behind the scenes, there was someone else. Not a third party brought in for mediation. A shadow player. Someone feeding information, shaping perceptions, driving decisions in ways you couldn't see. And by the time you realized the triangle existed, the damage was already done. Triangulated betrayal is the use of a third party to manipulate, control, or undermine a relationship without direct confrontation. It's not honest conflict. It's indirect warfare. The betrayer doesn't face you themselves. They wrote everything through someone else, using that person as a shield, a weapon, or both. The structure creates asymmetry. You're trying to engage directly, but you're not actually dealing with the person you think you are. You're dealing with their intermediary. their interpreter, their advocate. And that third party has their own interests, their own biases, their own version of events that may or may not align with reality. The triangle distorts everything. A parent uses one child to communicate displeasure with the other. Instead of addressing the issue directly, they tell the sibling, who then relays the message. The sibling becomes the messenger, the interpreter, the one caught in the middle. The parent avoids the discomfort of direct confrontation. The targeted child receives criticism filtered through someone else. The triangle poisons both relationships. A partner brings a friend into conflicts instead of addressing issues directly. They vent to the friend. The friend offers advice. The advice reinforces the partner's perspective. Then the partner comes back to the relationship armed with validation that wasn't earned through actual resolution. You're not arguing with your partner anymore. You're arguing with their friend's version of your partner's version of you. A manager uses one employee to deliver criticism to another. Or worse, to gather information. The intermediary is put in an impossible position. Complying means betraying a peer. Refusing means tension with leadership. Meanwhile, the person being discussed has no idea the triangle exists until the consequences arrive. What makes triangulation so damaging is the confusion it creates. You can't address a problem you can't see. You're responding to behavior that doesn't make sense until you realize it's being shaped by someone who isn't even in the room. And once you see the triangle, you can't unsee it. Every interaction becomes suspect. Is this really their perspective, or is it someone else's influence dressed up as their own? The betrayal is layered. The person who built the triangle betrayed your trust by refusing direct communication. The third party, if they participated willingly, betrayed you by enabling the manipulation. And both of them, whether intentionally or not, distorted the relationship into something unrecognizable. You're not in a partnership anymore. You're in a dynamic where honesty has been replaced by strategic positioning, and you weren't even told the game had started. Intimacy exploitation. They made you feel safe. Safe enough to let your guard down. Safe enough to share the parts of yourself you usually keep hidden. The fears that don't make sense. The desires that feel too vulnerable to name. The wounds that haven't healed. And you thought that safety was mutual. That the intimacy you were building meant something to them the way it meant something to you. Until you realized they were collecting information. And what you shared in trust, they were storing for leverage. Intimacy exploitation is the extraction of vulnerability for strategic gain. It's not connection, it's reconnaissance. The person doesn't want closeness. They want access. To your weaknesses. To your fears. To the parts of you that can be used if they ever need to control, manipulate, or discard you. The tactic works because intimacy requires vulnerability. You can't build closeness without lowering defenses. And in healthy relationships, that vulnerability is reciprocal, protected, honored. But in exploitation, it's one-directional. You open up, they take notes. And the safety you felt was never real. It was strategy disguised as care. A new partner asks deep questions early. They want to know about your past, your insecurities, what hurt you before. It feels like genuine interest. Like they're trying to understand you. But later in conflicts, everything you shared gets weaponized. They know exactly where to press to destabilize you, because you gave them the map. A colleague builds rapport by sharing personal stories. They make the relationship feel reciprocal. You start confiding in them. About frustrations at work, about doubts, about plans. Then, when it benefits them, that information surfaces. Not directly. Just strategically placed in the right conversation with the right person. You trusted them with your perspective. They used it to position themselves ahead of you. A family member draws you into emotional conversations. They want to know how you're really doing. It feels supportive until you realize the information travels. Your struggles become family gossip. Your boundaries become things they share to make themselves look reasonable by comparison. The intimacy wasn't for connection. It was for content. What makes this betrayal uniquely painful is the inversion. The moments that felt closest, the conversations that felt most real, were actually the setup. Every time you thought you were building trust, you were handing over tools that would later be used against you. And the person facilitating it knew. They didn't stumble into exploitation. They engineered it. The aftermath leaves you locked down, not just with the person who exploited you, but with everyone. Because now vulnerability feels like risk. Intimacy feels like exposure, and the instinct to protect yourself by staying surface level isn't paranoia. It's pattern recognition. You learn that openness can be harvested, and once that lesson sets in, it's hard to unlearn, even with people who deserve your trust. Dependency betrayal. You needed them, and they knew it. Not in an abstract way. Concretely, you were relying on them for something essential. Financial support, emotional stability, housing, care, a job. And that dependency created a power imbalance. They had leverage, and you were vulnerable. And instead of honoring that responsibility, they used it, not to help, to control, to extract, to ensure you stayed dependent because your dependence served them. Dependency betrayal is the exploitation of someone's reliance. It happens when the person in the position of power recognizes that the dependent party can't easily leave, can't easily resist, and weaponizes that constraint. The betrayal isn't just in what they take. It's in the fact that they take it from someone who can't afford to lose more. The dynamic works because dependency limits options. When you need someone, pushing back becomes risky. Saying no might mean losing what you can't replace. So you tolerate things you wouldn't otherwise accept. You compromise boundaries you'd normally defend, and the person you depend on learns that your need makes you negotiable. An elderly parent relies on an adult child for care. The child agrees, but over time, the care becomes conditional. Emotional manipulation. Financial control. Decisions made without input. The parent's dependency means they can't easily challenge it. Complaining might mean losing the care they need. The child isn't helping. They're leveraging necessity. An employee depends on their manager for job security, especially in a tight economy. The manager knows this. Starts asking for things beyond the job description. Unpaid overtime, personal favors, tolerating inappropriate behavior. The employee can't refuse without risking termination. The dependency turns the employment relationship into something exploitative. A partner controls the finances in a relationship. The other partner has no independent income, no separate accounts. When they try to assert autonomy, the controlling partner uses money as leverage, threatens to cut off access, uses spending as a tool of approval and punishment. The financial dependency becomes a cage, and the betrayal is that the person who was supposed to be a partner is acting as a warden. What separates dependency betrayal from ordinary exploitation is awareness. The person doing it knows you can't leave, knows you don't have better options, knows the power imbalance, and instead of using that position responsibly, they extract from it. They take what you can't afford to give because they understand you can't stop them without destabilizing your own survival. The cruelty is in the binding. You can't address the betrayal without risking the dependency. Confrontation might mean losing the support you need. So you stay. Not because the relationship is good, not because you want to, but because the cost of leaving is too high, and the person exploiting you knows it. That's why it works. That's why it continues. And that's why when you finally do find a way out, the relief is mixed with the crushing realization of how long you were trapped in something that should have been care but was always control. Moral injury through betrayal. When someone you believed in does something morally reprehensible, the damage isn't just relational. It's internal. Your sense of what's right, what's acceptable, what people are capable of, gets destabilized. Not because you did anything wrong, because someone you trusted revealed themselves to be someone you can't reconcile with the person you thought they were. This is moral injury through betrayal. The psychological wound that comes from witnessing or being complicit, even passively, in a violation of deeply held values by someone whose integrity you never questioned. It's not guilt for your own actions. It's the collapse of your belief in theirs. The injury occurs because we tie our moral framework partly to the people we trust. When a mentor, a partner, a parent, someone whose judgment you relied on acts in ways that contradict core principles, it creates a rupture. Not just in the relationship, but in your understanding of how the world works. If they could do this, what else did you misjudge? Who else can't be trusted? A mentor you admired for their ethics gets caught in fraud. Not a small mistake. Deliberate, sustained deception that harm people. You built part of your professional identity around their guidance. Now that foundation feels contaminated. Every lesson they taught carries a new question. Was any of it real, or was it always performance covering calculation? A parent who positioned themselves as principled turns out to have been lying for years about something significant. An affair kept hidden. Financial manipulation. Cruelty disguised as discipline. The betrayal isn't just what they did. It's the realization that the moral authority they claimed was never earned. And you internalized their standards while they were violating them. A partner you thought shared your values does something you find morally indefensible. Maybe they exploit someone vulnerable. Maybe they lie in ways that cause real harm. Maybe they prioritize gain over integrity in a situation where you thought they'd hold the line. You didn't just lose trust in them. You lost trust in your ability to recognize moral character. Moral injury doesn't heal with time the way other wounds do. It lingers as a shift in how you see people. You become more suspicious, more vigilant, less willing to assume good faith, because the person who caused the injury wasn't a stranger. They were someone you believed in. And if your judgment failed that catastrophically once, how do you ever trust it again? Gaslit betrayal. The betrayal happened. You know it did. You have evidence, receipts, messages, patterns that don't lie. But when you confront them, they don't just deny it. They rewrite it. They tell you you're remembering wrong, that you're overreacting, that the evidence you're holding doesn't mean what you think it means. And if you push, they make you the problem. You're paranoid. You're obsessive. You're creating drama where there isn't any. Gaslit betrayal is the double violation. First, the betrayal itself. Second, the denial so aggressive that it makes you question whether the betrayal even happened. It's not just lying. It's the systematic dismantling of your perception so that defending yourself starts to feel like the actual offense. The tactic works by exploiting doubt. You confront them with something concrete. They respond with confidence. Absolute certainty that you're wrong. And if they're that sure, and you're the only one saying otherwise, the ground shifts. Maybe you are misinterpreting. Maybe your memory is faulty. Maybe the anxiety you feel is proof that you're the unstable one, not them. You find messages that prove a lie. Clear. Undeniable. When you bring them up, they don't apologize. They reframe. Those messages don't say what you think. You're reading into them. You're twisting things because you want to be upset. And the conversation turns. Now you're defending why you went through their phone. Why you don't trust them. The betrayal gets buried under your reaction to it. You catch them in a pattern of deception. When you point it out, they flip it. They accuse you of being controlling, of monitoring them, of making the relationship unbearable with your suspicion. The real problem isn't what they did. It's that you noticed. And if you keep pressing, they suggest therapy. Not couples therapy. Therapy for you. Because clearly, you're the one who needs help managing your emotions. A family member takes something from you. Money? Credit. Opportunity. When you call it out, they act baffled. That's not what happened. You're misremembering. You're being dramatic. And if you keep insisting, they bring in others. Doesn't this sound like something they'd blow out of proportion? Now you're not just fighting the betrayal. You're fighting the narrative that you're unreliable. And the longer it goes, the more you start wondering if maybe they're right. Gaslit betrayal doesn't just damage the relationship. It damages your relationship with reality. You stop trusting your memory, your instincts, your ability to interpret evidence. Because someone you trusted, someone who should have admitted what they did, instead convinced you that the problem is your perception. And that erosion doesn't stop when the relationship ends. It follows you, makes you second-guess yourself in situations where you should be certain. Because once someone successfully rewrites reality on you, you never fully trust your version again. Attachment rupture. They were the constant, the person you always thought would be there. Not because they promised necessarily, just because the relationship felt solid. Permanent. The kind of connection you didn't think you had to protect because it had always held. And then it didn't. Not through conflict. Not through distance. Just a fracture that opened so quietly you didn't feel it until the bond was already gone. Attachment rupture is the breaking of a foundational emotional connection. The kind that shapes how you move through the world. When it severs, the loss isn't just about missing the person. It's about losing the secure base you built your sense of safety around. Attachment bonds form through consistency, repeated presence, reliability over time. You learn that this person will respond when you reach out, will care when you're struggling, will show up, not because they have to, but because the connection matters. That repetition builds trust at a level deeper than logic. It becomes wired, automatic. You stop questioning it because it's always been there. The rupture doesn't announce itself. It starts as withdrawal. Subtle at first. Responses that take longer. Conversations that feel less engaged. The warmth that used to be reflexive now feels effortful. You notice, but you rationalize. They're busy. They're stressed. It's temporary. But it doesn't reverse. The distance expands. And at some point you realize the connection isn't just strained. It's fundamentally altered. A parent who was always emotionally available becomes distant. Not because of a fight. Just a shift. They stop asking how you are. Stop offering the kind of support that used to be guaranteed. You reach out the way you always did, but the response is different. Shorter. Less personal. The rupture isn't dramatic. It's the slow recognition that the relationship you relied on doesn't function the way it used to. A best friend who felt like family starts pulling back. Plans get cancelled. Messages go unanswered longer. When you do connect, it feels surface level. The depth that used to define the friendship isn't there anymore. You don't know what changed. You didn't fight. You didn't do anything wrong that you can identify. But the bond that felt unshackable is suddenly fragile, and you're scrambling to understand why. The rupture leaves you unmoored. Because attachment isn't just about liking someone. It's about where you turn when things fall apart. It's the person you don't have to explain yourself to. The relationship that holds even when everything else is unstable. When that breaks, you lose more than the connection. You lose the part of your foundation you didn't realize you were standing on. And rebuilding takes more than finding new people. It takes trusting that a bond can be secure again. Which feels impossible when the one you thought was permanent turned out not to be. Abandonment shock. One day they're there, fully present, fully committed. The next day they're not. No warning. No gradual distancing. Just gone. The relationship you thought was solid disappears, so abruptly that you're left holding the pieces of something that was whole yesterday, trying to understand how it shattered overnight. Abandonment shock is the psychological impact of sudden, unexpected relational loss. It's not slow drift. It's not mutual decision. It's the person who mattered most exiting so quickly that your mind can't process the shift. The relationship existed and then it didn't, and the gap between those two states is so sharp it doesn't feel real. The shock comes from the rupture of continuity. Your nervous system was calibrated to this person's presence. You had routines, expectations, a future you assumed would include them. Abandonment doesn't give you time to adjust. It forces immediate recalibration, and the system isn't built for that. The result is disorientation, a feeling that reality itself glitched. A partner ends the relationship out of nowhere. No escalating arguments. No obvious signs of discontent. One conversation and it's over. They've already made the decision. They're not interested in working through it. They're done. And you're left trying to reconcile the person who said they loved you last week with the person walking out today. A close friend cuts contact without explanation. You reach out. Nothing. You try again. Silence. There's no closure. No conversation where things went wrong. Just the sudden absence of someone who was woven into your daily life. You don't know what you did if you did anything. You just know they're gone, and the void they left is disorienting. A family member disappears from your life after a conflict that didn't seem final. You expected tension. Maybe some distance. But not total withdrawal. No calls. No visits. No acknowledgement of your existence. The relationship ends not with a confrontation, but with silence so complete it feels like erasure. The shock doesn't come from sadness alone. It comes from the collapse of predictability. You thought you knew this person. Thought you understood the relationship. Thought you'd see signs if things were falling apart. The fact that you didn't means either you missed something massive, or they hid it entirely. Either way, your ability to read relationships feels compromised. And that disorientation lingers. You become hypervigilant with new people, scanning for signs of impending abandonment. Because if it happened once without warning, it can happen again. And your nervous system won't let you forget that. Double life psychology. They're not just hiding something. They're maintaining two complete versions of reality. One where they're the person you know, partner, parent, friend, and another where they're someone entirely different. Different relationships, different commitments, different identity, and they move between these worlds so seamlessly that neither side knows the other exists. Double life psychology is the mental compartmentalization required to sustain parallel identities without collapse. It's not occasional lying. It's architectural, a sustained structure where every aspect of life is duplicated, and the person operating both versions has trained themselves not to let them touch. The psychology works through separation. Each life occupies a distinct mental space, different routines, different emotional registers, different social networks. The person doesn't experience them as conflicting because they're processed separately. In one compartment, they're fully present as the devoted partner. In another, they're fully present as someone else's partner. The contradiction doesn't create dissonance because the compartments don't communicate. Someone maintains a second family, not an affair. A fully realized parallel household. They split time between them with precision. Holidays, birthdays, everyday life. Each family believes they have this person's full presence. Neither knows about the other. The logistics are staggering. The deception is constant. But to the person doing it, it's manageable. Because they've learned to think of each life as its own contained reality. A person builds a professional identity in one city while maintaining a completely different one elsewhere. Different name, different credentials, different history. They travel between them, shifting personas with the geography. To colleagues in one location, they're one person. To colleagues in the other, they're someone else. The mental effort required to keep the details straight would overwhelm most people. But for someone running a double life, it becomes routine. A partner maintains a secret relationship while appearing fully committed at home. Not just hidden texts. A whole separate emotional world. Trips explained as work. Time accounted for with precision. They don't slip because they've compartmentalized so completely that each relationship exists in isolation. The guilt that would paralyze others doesn't register the same way, because they've convinced themselves that the two lives don't cancel each other out. They coexist. The collapse is inevitable. Not because the person wants it, but because the structure can't hold indefinitely. A message sent to the wrong person. A schedule conflict that can't be explained. An overlap that forces the compartments to collide. And when it happens, the fallout isn't just about the deception. It's about the realization that someone was capable of sustaining that level of division. That they could be fully present in your life while living an entirely separate one you knew nothing about. The betrayal isn't just what they hid. It's the proof that they could fragment themselves so completely and never show a crack. Selective disclosure in betrayal. They tell you the truth, just not all of it. They admit to the piece you already know about, the part you have evidence for, and frame it as full honesty. They apologize. They explain. They make it seem like you're finally getting the real story. And you want to believe them. You want this to be the end of it. But later you find out there was more. Things they carefully left out. Details that would have changed everything if you'd known them when they were supposedly coming clean. Selective disclosure is the controlled release of truth. It's not honesty. It's damage control disguised as confession. The person admits to enough to seem accountable while withholding the parts that would fully expose the scale of what they did. The strategy works because partial truth feels like progress. You've been lied to. You confront them. They admit something. That admission creates the illusion of transparency. You feel like you've broken through. Like you're finally seeing the real version. But what you're actually seeing is the version they're willing to show you. The rest stays hidden until you find it yourself, at which point they admit to that piece too, and act like they were always planning to tell you. A partner admits to an emotional connection with someone else after you find messages. They frame it as inappropriate but not physical. They apologize for crossing a line. You're hurt, but at least they're being honest now. Months later, you find out it was physical. When confronted again, they admit it. But now the initial confession feels like another layer of deception. They didn't come clean. They gave you the minimum required to stop you from digging further. A colleague admits to taking credit for part of your work after someone else mentions it. They apologize. Say it was a mistake. Make it seem like an isolated incident. Later, you find out they've been doing it systematically. The first admission wasn't honesty. It was inoculation. Admit to the smallest version so that if more surfaces, you're already primed to forgive because they came clean before. A family member confesses to borrowing money without asking. You're upset, but they're apologetic. They pay it back. Months later, you discover they took more, much more, and didn't mention it because you seemed satisfied with the first apology. The selective disclosure turned a major violation into something you thought was resolved, while the actual scope stayed hidden. What makes selective disclosure so corrosive is the layering. Each new revelation doesn't just add information. It recontextualizes every prior admission. The apology you accepted wasn't real. The accountability you thought you saw was theater. And now you're left wondering, is this the whole truth, or just the next layer they're willing to release? the trust doesn't rebuild. It erodes further. Because you can't believe someone who keeps proving they'll only tell you what they have to. Image preservation after betrayal. They betrayed you. The evidence is clear. The damage is done. But watch what happens next. They don't retreat. They don't accept accountability. They launch a campaign. Not to repair the relationship, but to control the narrative. To make sure that when people hear about what happened, they hear their version first. The version where they're not the villain. Where the betrayal wasn't really betrayal. Where you're the one who misunderstood, overreacted, or caused the problem in the first place. Image preservation after betrayal is the strategic management of public perception following a violation. It's not remorse. It's reputation defense. The person who betrayed you shifts their energy from addressing what they did to ensuring that what they did doesn't define how others see them. The operation runs on speed. They know that whoever speaks first often shapes the dominant narrative. So they get ahead of it. They reach out to mutual friends. They frame the situation before you can. They position themselves as the reasonable one. The one who tried. The one who's hurt by your reaction. By the time you're ready to talk about what actually happened, the story is already circulating, and it's not yours. A partner who cheated doesn't just apologize privately. They start managing the breakup publicly. They tell friends they'd grown apart, that the relationship had problems you both contributed to. That ending it was mutual, or at least necessary. They don't mention the affair unless forced to, and even then, they minimize it. Frame it as a symptom of a relationship that was already over. The goal isn't honesty. It's making sure the social fallout doesn't land entirely on them. A colleague who sabotaged you doesn't stay quiet. They preemptively explain to others that there was a misunderstanding. That you're upset, but it's not what it looks like. They position themselves as confused by your anger, as if the betrayal you experienced is a story you're telling yourself. And because they got there first, people start seeing you as the problem. The one holding a grudge. The one who can't let things go. A family member who violated your trust doesn't own it privately and let it stay private. They tell their version to everyone. They emphasize their intentions, their struggles, the context you're supposedly ignoring. They make themselves the injured party, the one being unfairly vilified. And the more people hear their side, the harder it becomes for you to set the record straight without looking vindictive. Image preservation doesn't just protect their reputation. It isolates you. Because now, when you try to explain what happened, you're not just sharing your experience. You're contradicting a narrative that's already embedded. People have already formed opinions, already taken sides. And challenging that requires more energy, more proof, more willingness to be seen as difficult than most people can sustain. So often, you stop trying. Not because the betrayal didn't happen, but because fighting to be believed becomes its own form of exhaustion. Self-betrayal. You knew what you needed. You knew what your boundaries were. You knew what compromising them would cost. And you did it anyway. Not because someone forced you. Not because you didn't have a choice. But because in that moment, staying aligned with someone else, avoiding conflict, keeping the peace, felt more urgent than staying aligned with yourself. Self-betrayal is the abandonment of your own needs, values, or boundaries to maintain a relationship or avoid discomfort. It's not sacrifice for something meaningful. It's the erosion of integrity in service of keeping something that might not be worth keeping. The betrayal doesn't feel dramatic when it happens. It feels like accommodation, like being flexible, like not making a big deal out of something that might not matter. But it does matter. And every time you override your instincts to keep someone else comfortable, you're training yourself to distrust what you know is true. You set a boundary, and the other person pushes back. Not aggressively, just persistent questioning. Why is this such a big deal? Can't you make an exception? And instead of holding the line, you fold. You tell yourself it's not worth the fight, that you're being too rigid, that relationships require compromise. So you let it go. But it wasn't compromise. It was capitulation. And now the boundary you set doesn't hold weight anymore. Not to them and not to you. You feel uncomfortable with how someone treats you, but you don't say anything, because saying something would create tension, would make you look sensitive, would risk the relationship. So you stay quiet. You rationalize their behavior. You convince yourself it's not that bad. And in doing so, you betray the part of yourself that knows it is that bad, that knows you deserve better, that knows silence is costing you something you can't afford to keep losing. You stay in a situation that's draining you because leaving feels too hard, too complicated, too uncertain. So you adjust. You lower your expectations. You numb the discomfort. You tell yourself it's temporary, that it'll get better, that you're being dramatic. And all the while, you're betraying the version of yourself that would have left a long time ago if you'd been listening. Self-betrayal compounds. Each time you override your needs, it gets easier to do it again. The voice that tells you something's wrong gets quieter. The justifications get smoother. And eventually, you lose track of what you actually want because you've spent so long prioritizing what everyone else wants from you. The damage isn't just in what you tolerate. It's in the erosion of self-trust. You stop believing your instincts because you've ignored them too many times. You stop setting boundaries because you've proven to yourself that you won't enforce them. And the person you've betrayed most isn't the one who violated your boundaries. It's yourself for letting it happen over and over until you forgot what it felt like to hold the line. Institutional betrayal. You trusted the system, the organization, the institution. Not blindly. You knew it wasn't perfect. But you believed that when it mattered, when someone was genuinely harmed, there would be accountability, protection, process. And then something happened. You reported it, followed the rules, did everything you were supposed to do. And the institution didn't protect you. It protected itself. Or worse, it protected the person who harmed you. Institutional betrayal is the failure of an organization to prevent, respond to, or address harm in ways that compound the original violation. It's not just one person failing you. It's the structure itself prioritizing reputation, liability, or convenience over the people it claims to serve. The betrayal works through inversion. Institutions present themselves as protective. Employers promise safe workplaces. Schools promise student welfare. Medical systems promise care. Legal systems promise justice. When those promises break, the harm isn't just personal. It's systemic. The entity you turn to for help becomes another source of damage. You report harassment at work. Follow the official channels. Provide documentation. The company launches an investigation, but the investigation isn't about truth. It's about risk management. They look for ways to minimize liability, to discredit your account, to frame the situation as a misunderstanding. Meanwhile, the person you reported stays in their position. You're the one who gets quietly managed out. The institution didn't fail to protect you. It chose not to. A student reports misconduct by a faculty member. The university says it takes these matters seriously. Opens a process. Months pass. The process is opaque, traumatizing. The burden of proof falls on the student. The faculty member has resources, support, legal representation. The student has none. Eventually, the case is dismissed, or the faculty member gets a quiet reprimand and stays on. The student transfers, drops out, carries the weight of being unbelieved, while the institution moves on as if accountability happened. A patient experiences harm due to medical negligence. They file a complaint. The hospital investigates itself, finds no wrongdoing. or finds wrongdoing but does nothing that prevents it from happening again. The system closes ranks, protects its own, and the patient is left with injury compounded by the realization that the institution designed to heal treated their harm as a public relations problem. Institutional betrayal doesn't just harm the individual. It sends a message to everyone watching. The system doesn't work. Reporting doesn't lead to protection. Accountability is theater, and the people who speak up pay the price while the institution preserves itself. The cruelty is in the power imbalance. You can leave a person. You can't always leave an institution. Your job, your school, your community. And even when you do leave, the betrayal follows. Because you learn that the structure's meant to protect people like you don't. And that knowledge doesn't just change how you see that institution. It changes how you see all of them. Betrayal rumination. You can't stop replaying it. The moment you found out. The conversations that came before that now feel like evidence you missed. The signs you didn't see. The details that don't add up. Your mind loops through the same scenes over and over, searching for the explanation that will make it make sense. But it never does. And the more you search, the more trapped you become in the cycle. Betrayal rumination is the compulsive mental replay of a betrayal and its surrounding context. It's not productive reflection. It's a cognitive loop that your mind gets stuck in, because the betrayal violated your model of reality, and your brain is trying to restore coherence by analyzing it endlessly. The loop works because betrayal creates an explanatory gap. Your mind expected one thing. Reality delivered another. That mismatch triggers a drive to resolve the inconsistency. So you replay. You analyze. You search for the moment where things went wrong. The clue you missed. The warning sign you should have caught. Your brain treats this as a problem it can solve, but it can't. Because the betrayal already happened. The information you're searching for either doesn't exist or won't change the outcome. You lie awake replaying the last conversation you had before you found out. Were they lying then? Did they know what they were about to do? Was there something in their tone, their words, their body language that you missed? You go over it frame by frame, looking for the crack. And sometimes you find something that, in hindsight, feels like evidence. But it doesn't help. It just confirms that you didn't see it in real time, which makes you feel worse. You analyze every interaction you had with the person who betrayed you, looking for patterns. Trying to determine when they stopped being genuine. When the performance started. Was it always fake? Or was there a turning point? Your mind creates theories, tests them, discards them, creates new ones. The rumination feels like progress because you're actively thinking, but you're not moving forward. You're circling the same unresolved question, how did I not know? You replay the moment of discovery. The conversation, the evidence, what you said, what they said, what you wish you'd said. You rewrite it in your head. Imagine versions where you were calmer, more articulate, more devastating. Where you had the perfect response instead of the messy, emotional one you actually gave. But rewriting it doesn't change what happened. It just keeps you anchored in a moment you can't alter. Rumination feels justified. Of course you're thinking about it. It was significant. It hurt. You're trying to understand. But the loop doesn't lead to understanding. It leads to exhaustion, mental fatigue, an inability to focus on anything else because your mind keeps returning to the same unresolved grief. What breaks rumination isn't more analysis. It's acceptance that some questions don't have satisfying answers. You won't always know why they did it. You won't always catch the signs you missed. And understanding every detail won't undo the damage. The loop only stops when you stop asking it to deliver closure it can't provide. Reversal of blame after betrayal. You confront them. You have the evidence, the timeline, the receipts. The betrayal is undeniable. And instead of accountability, instead of apology, you get something else. Deflection. Accusation. Suddenly you're the one under scrutiny. They don't deny what they did, but they reframe it. You caused this. Your behavior pushed them to it. If you'd been different, better, more understanding, none of this would have happened. The betrayal becomes your fault. Reversal of blame after betrayal is the redirection of responsibility from the person who committed the violation to the person who was harmed. It's not just avoiding accountability. It's actively constructing a narrative where the betrayed party is the real problem. The tactic works by exploiting relationship history. Every relationship has friction. Every person has flaws. The betrayer mines that history for justification. They take your mistakes, your weaknesses, your moments of conflict, and build a case. A case that says their betrayal was a response, a reaction, something you forced them into by being who you are. A partner caught cheating doesn't just admit it. They list everything you did wrong in the relationship. You were distant. You didn't make them feel appreciated. You stopped trying. The affair becomes a symptom of your failure to meet their needs. They're not saying it was right. They're saying you made it inevitable. And now the conversation isn't about their betrayal. It's about your inadequacy. A friend who violated your trust flips it. They bring up times you weren't there for them. Times you were busy. Times you didn't respond fast enough. They frame their betrayal as payback for your neglect. You hurt them first. They were just reacting. And suddenly, you're the one defending yourself instead of them answering for what they did. A family member who crossed a boundary you set blames you for having the boundary in the first place. You're too sensitive, too demanding, too difficult. If you weren't so rigid, they wouldn't have had to go around you. The boundary violation becomes evidence of your unreasonableness, not their disrespect. And now you're stuck defending the right to have boundaries instead of them explaining why they violated them. The reversal doesn't just avoid accountability. It destabilizes you. Because maybe they're right. Maybe you did contribute. Maybe your flaws created the conditions. And once that doubt takes hold, you start second-guessing. Start apologizing. Start taking responsibility for their betrayal because they've convinced you that you caused it. What makes this particularly damaging is that it works even when it shouldn't. Even when the betrayal was unilateral. Even when there's no reasonable justification. Because if you care about the person, if you want to salvage the relationship, if you're already questioning yourself, blame reversal gives you something to fix. It's easier to believe you caused it and to accept that someone you trusted chose to harm you for reasons that have nothing to do with who you are. Public loyalty, private betrayal split. They defend you in public. When others criticize, they're the first to push back. When you're not in the room, they speak highly of you. To outsiders, they're your strongest supporter, your most loyal ally. But in private, away from witnesses, the loyalty evaporates. They undermine you. They criticize. They withhold support. They do the opposite of what they perform publicly. And the split is so complete that you start questioning which version is real. Public loyalty with private betrayal is the maintenance of two contradictory relational stances. One for external consumption. One for actual interaction. The public version builds credibility and social capital. The private version extracts, controls, or punishes without accountability. The split works because public behavior carries more weight in social perception. People see the defense, the support, the loyalty. That becomes the accepted reality. What happens in private stays invisible unless you expose it. And exposing it means contradicting the public narrative, which makes you look like the problem. The betrayer counts on that. They build a public image so strong that private contradictions feel unspeakable. A manager praises you in meetings. talks about how valuable you are to the team, publicly backs your ideas. But in private, they're different. They question your judgment, micromanage, withhold opportunities. You feel the disparity but can't reconcile it. To others, they're your champion. To you, they're an obstacle. And if you try to explain the gap, it sounds like paranoia. Everyone else sees the public support. Only you experience the private undermining. A family member speaks warmly about you to relatives, defends you when others gossip, projects closeness. But when you're alone, they're cold, dismissive, critical. The warmth they show publicly never translates to private interaction. You're left confused. Is the public version fake, or is the private version the aberration? And because the public performance is so consistent, you start wondering if you're imagining the private cruelty. A friend hypes you up in group settings, makes you sound important, valued, but one-on-one they're different. They minimize your successes. They're unavailable when you need support. The loyalty they perform in front of others never shows up when it's just the two of you. And pointing this out makes you sound ungrateful. After all, they just said all those nice things about you. How can you complain? The split creates a specific kind of gaslighting. You experience one relationship. Everyone else sees another. And because public perception is based on observable behavior, the private betrayal becomes something you can't prove. It's your word against their public image. And their public image is built specifically to make your word seem unreliable. What makes it unbearable is the isolation. You can't get validation because no one else sees what you see. You can't get support because everyone thinks the person is great to you. And you can't leave without seeming irrational. Because how do you explain that the person everyone sees as your biggest supporter is privately someone entirely different? The betrayal isn't just in the split. It's in the way the split makes you question your own perception until you don't trust what you know is true. Relational deception. The relationship you thought you had doesn't exist. Not because it ended. Because it was never what you believed it to be. They presented one version. Caring, committed, invested. But underneath, the actual relationship was transactional, strategic, conditional in ways they never disclosed. You were operating on one set of terms. They were operating on another. And the gap between what you thought was happening and what was actually happening is so wide that discovering it feels like waking up in a different reality. Relational deception is the sustained misrepresentation of the nature, terms, or purpose of a relationship. It's not a single lie. It's a structural dishonesty where the entire relationship is built on a false premise that one party maintains and the other believes. The deception works through performance. They say the right things, show up in the right ways, create the appearance of the relationship you think you're in. But the performance is cover for an entirely different agenda. They're extracting something, securing something, maintaining access to something. And the version of the relationship they're showing you is designed to keep you from seeing what's actually motivating them. You think you're in a friendship. They're treating it like networking. Every conversation, every favor, every piece of support is being banked for future use. They're not connecting with you. They're positioning themselves. And the warmth, the interest, the investment you're experiencing isn't genuine closeness. It's relationship management. You find out when they get what they needed and the performance drops. Suddenly, they're unavailable, unresponsive. The friendship you thought was real evaporates because it was never friendship. It was strategy. You believe you're in a committed partnership. They're keeping their options open. They're not lying about caring for you, but they're also not being honest about how conditional that care is. They're measuring, comparing, waiting to see if something better comes along. The relationship you think is building toward a future is actually on probation. And they never told you that's the frame they're operating in. You assume your relationship with a family member is based on mutual care. But for them, it's about maintaining image. Appearances. They show up because it looks good, because it fulfills social expectations, not because the relationship matters to them the way it matters to you. The care you're giving is real. The care you're receiving is performance. And that asymmetry creates a deception so fundamental that when you finally see it, it doesn't just hurt. It makes you question whether you ever knew them at all. Relational deception doesn't just break trust in one person. It makes you doubt your ability to read relationships. Because if you were this wrong about what was happening, what else are you misreading? The deception wasn't in isolated lies. It was in the foundation. And once that's exposed, rebuilding doesn't mean fixing what broke. It means starting over with the knowledge that relationships can be entirely different from what they appear, and you might not know until it's too late. Trust collapse. Trust doesn't erode gradually in every betrayal. Sometimes it drops all at once. One moment you trust them completely. The next you don't trust them at all. Not because you decided to stop, but because something happened that was so incompatible with the person you thought they were that the entire structure of trust collapsed in an instant. Trust collapse is the sudden, total breakdown of confidence in someone's character or reliability. It's not incremental damage. It's catastrophic failure. The foundation you built trust on turns out to have been unstable the entire time. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. The trust doesn't rebuild. It's gone. The collapse happens when evidence surfaces that contradicts not just one action, but your entire understanding of who they are. You trusted them because you believed they operated with certain values, certain principles, certain limits. And then they do something that proves those beliefs were wrong. Not slightly off, fundamentally wrong. And once that happens, every prior interaction gets reinterpreted. Were they ever the person you thought? Or was that always a projection you made because you wanted to believe it? A partner you trusted completely gets caught in a lie so significant that it rewrites the relationship. Not a small deception. Something that reveals they've been living a double life, maintaining secrets on a scale you couldn't have imagined. The trust doesn't just break. It disintegrates. Because if they were capable of hiding this, what else have they hidden? What else are they still hiding? You can't rebuild trust when the person you're supposed to trust turned out to be someone you never actually knew. A friend you've known for years does something so out of alignment with who you thought they were that the friendship ends instantly. Not because you're punishing them, because you suddenly realize you don't know them. The version you trusted doesn't match the person capable of doing what they did. And trying to reconcile those two versions is impossible. The trust collapse isn't a choice. It's a recognition. The person you trusted doesn't exist. A colleague you relied on betrays you in a way that's so calculated, so deliberate, that you can't see them the same way again. You thought they had integrity. Turns out they don't. And that realization doesn't just change your professional relationship. It changes how you see every interaction you ever had with them. The trust you built over years disappears in the time it takes to process what they did. Trust collapse is permanent in a way that gradual erosion isn't. Because it's not about repairing damage. It's about the fact that the thing you thought you were repairing never existed in the first place. You weren't wrong to trust them because they changed. You were wrong because you never had accurate information about who they were. And once you know that, trust isn't something you rebuild. It's something you realize was always based on incomplete data. And no amount of time or effort changes that. Protective denial of betrayal. You saw the signs. You know something's wrong. But admitting it means facing a reality you're not ready for. So instead, you explain it away. You rationalize. You create alternative stories that let you keep believing the relationship is intact. It's not that you're stupid. It's that accepting the betrayal would require dismantling something you depend on. And your mind protects you from that by refusing to let the evidence land. Protective denial of betrayal is the psychological defense mechanism that blocks acknowledgement of betrayal even when evidence is present. It's not conscious lying to yourself. It's an automatic filter that processes information in ways that preserve the relationship you need to believe in. The mechanism works because betrayal creates unbearable cognitive dissonance. On one hand, you have evidence. On the other, you have a relationship that matters. A person you trust. A life structure built around that trust. Accepting the evidence means accepting that the relationship is not what you thought, that the person is not who you thought, and that the stability you've been operating under is false. That's too destabilizing. So your mind suppresses the conclusion and generates alternatives that let you keep functioning. Your partner's behavior changes. They're distant. Secretive. Their explanations don't quite add up. You notice. But instead of confronting the possibility of betrayal, you create other explanations. They're stressed. Work is overwhelming them. They need space. You're being paranoid. The evidence keeps accumulating, but each piece gets absorbed into a narrative that avoids the central truth. And you do this not because you're naive, but because the alternative, accepting that they're betraying you, would collapse the life you've built. A friend starts treating you differently. Less available. Less warm. You can feel the shift. But acknowledging it means accepting that the friendship might be ending. That you might have done something wrong. That they might not value you the way you value them. So instead, you tell yourself they're busy, going through something. It's temporary. The denial protects you from the loss. At least for a while. A family member's actions reveal a pattern of disrespect. Boundary violations. Manipulation. It's been happening for a long time, but you've been reframing it. They don't mean it that way. They're just difficult. Everyone has flaws. The denial lets you maintain the relationship without facing how much damage it's causing. Because facing it would mean confronting hard choices. Distance. Boundaries. Possibly ending contact. And those consequences feel worse than the ongoing harm. Protective denial doesn't last forever. Eventually, the evidence becomes undeniable. Something happens that's too direct, too clear to reframe. And when the denial breaks, the betrayal doesn't feel new. It feels like something you've known the whole time but couldn't let yourself believe. The delayed recognition makes it worse. Not just because of what they did, but because of how long you participated in your own deception to avoid seeing it. Surveillance after betrayal. You can't stop checking. Their phone, their schedule, their social media, their explanations. Everything gets scrutinized because trust is gone and the only way to feel safe is to monitor. You know it's not sustainable. You know it's exhausting. But the alternative, trusting them again without verification, feels impossible. So you watch. You track. You look for inconsistencies. And even when you don't find anything, the relief doesn't last. Because the surveillance isn't building trust. It's managing fear. Surveillance after betrayal is the compulsive monitoring of a person's behavior following a violation of trust. It's not paranoia. It's hypervigilance driven by the need to prevent another blindside. The betrayal taught you that you can't rely on what they say. So you rely on what you can verify. And that verification becomes constant. The surveillance works as a short-term safety mechanism. It gives you a sense of control. If you're watching, you can't be deceived again. If you're checking, you'll catch the next lie before it compounds. But it doesn't restore trust. It replaces trust with oversight. And oversight is exhausting. It requires constant attention. Constant doubt. Constant readiness to catch the next violation. After a partner's affair, you start monitoring everything. You check their location. You scan their messages. You notice when stories don't match, and sometimes you catch small lies. Confirmations that your vigilance is justified. But other times, you find nothing. And instead of relaxing, you assume you're just not looking hard enough. The surveillance becomes its own trap. You can't trust them, so you have to watch. But watching doesn't make you trust them. It just proves you don't. After a friend betrays your confidence, you become hyper-aware of what you share. You track who knows what. You notice when information leaks. You test them with small details to see if those details spread. You're not building friendship. You're running counterintelligence. And the friendship that exists under that level of scrutiny isn't really a friendship anymore. It's a monitored relationship where you're perpetually waiting for the next violation. After a colleague undermines you, you start watching their every move. You document conversations. You keep records. You're careful about what you say around them. The surveillance makes you feel safer, more prepared. But it also means you can never relax. Every interaction is filtered through suspicion, and that suspicion, even when warranted, corrodes the working relationship beyond what the original betrayal did. Surveillance doesn't heal betrayal. It manages it. And the question it forces is whether a relationship that requires constant monitoring is worth maintaining. Because at some point, the energy spent watching becomes more costly than the value of the relationship itself. And the trust you're hoping to rebuild through verification never actually returns. You're just learning to live in a permanent state of mistrust, dressed up as caution. Comparison triggered betrayal fear. They didn't cheat. They didn't lie. But you saw how they looked at someone else. How they lit up in a conversation with someone who isn't you. How they laughed in a way that felt more genuine than anything you've gotten recently. And now you can't stop comparing. You're measuring yourself against whoever caught their attention, wondering if you're falling short, wondering if it's only a matter of time before looking turns into something more. Comparison-triggered betrayal fear is the anxiety that arises from perceiving a threat to the relationship through social comparison. It's not about evidence of betrayal. It's about the fear that someone else represents a version of what they want that you can't provide. And that fear, once triggered, creates a spiral of insecurity that feels like betrayal even though nothing has technically been violated. The fear works through perceived deficits. You notice them engaging with someone else in ways that feel different from how they engage with you. More animated, more attentive, more interested. And your mind immediately generates a story. That person is something you don't. They're funnier, more attractive, more interesting. And if that's true, then you're at risk. Not because your partner has done anything wrong, but because you're convinced you're being outcompeted. Your partner has a close friendship with someone who's successful in ways you're not. Every time they talk about this person, there's admiration in their voice. And you start wondering, are you enough? Do they wish you were more like that? The fear isn't based on anything they've said. It's based on the gap between who you are and who this other person is. And that gap feels like a threat. You notice your partner engaging with someone attractive. They're friendly, normal, but you see the way they smile, the way they lean in. And suddenly you're comparing yourself. Are you still attractive to them? Are you boring now? The comparison triggers a fear that you're being replaced before the replacement has even started. And that fear makes you anxious, clingy, resentful, which ironically creates the distance you were afraid of. The fear doesn't need evidence to sustain itself. It runs on hypotheticals. What if they're thinking about this person? What if they're disappointed in you? What if the relationship is already over in their mind and you just don't know it yet? The comparison becomes a constant background hum. Every interaction with your partner gets filtered through it. And you're not responding to what's actually happening. You're responding to the threat you've constructed. Comparison-triggered betrayal fear corrodes relationships from the inside. Not because betrayal happened, but because the fear of betrayal creates behaviors that damage trust. You start monitoring, testing, seeking reassurance. And the more you do that, the more your partner feels suffocated. The fear you're trying to manage ends up creating the distance it was afraid of. And now you're stuck in a loop where your anxiety about losing them is actively pushing them away. Possessive retention after betrayal. They betrayed you. You should leave. You know that. Everyone around you knows that. But instead of leaving, you hold on tighter. Not because the relationship got better. Because losing them feels worse than staying in something broken. So you double down. You try harder. You monitor more closely. You make yourself indispensable. You convince yourself that if you just manage it right, if you just stay vigilant enough, you can keep them from betraying you again. Possessive retention after betrayal is the intensified effort to maintain control over a relationship following a violation. It's not forgiveness. It's not rebuilding trust. It's the refusal to let go, driven by fear of loss, combined with attempts to prevent future betrayal through increased control and vigilance. The retention works through escalation. The betrayal created a threat. Instead of addressing the threat by leaving or demanding real change, you respond by tightening your grip. You need to know where they are, who they're with, what they're doing. You make rules, set conditions, monitor compliance. The relationship becomes a management project, and you convince yourself that this level of control is necessary, that it's the only way to prevent it from happening again. After infidelity, you don't end the relationship. You restructure it. You demand access to their phone, their location, their schedule. You check in constantly. You set boundaries about who they can see, where they can go. And you tell yourself this is accountability. But it's not partnership. It's surveillance justified as protection. And the relationship that continues isn't based on trust. It's based on your ability to monitor and their willingness to be monitored. After a friend betrays you, you don't cut them off. You keep them close. Closer than before, actually. Because if they're close, you can watch them. You can manage what they know. You can control the damage. The retention isn't about valuing the friendship. It's about not wanting to lose the position you had in their life. Even if that position is now defined by suspicion rather than connection. After a partner's emotional betrayal, you become hyper-involved in their life. You need constant reassurance, constant contact. You insert yourself into situations you weren't part of before, not because you trust them more, because you trust them less and proximity feels like control. You're not rebuilding intimacy. You're preventing distance. Because distance means opportunity, and opportunity means risk. Possessive retention doesn't fix betrayal. It transforms the relationship into something unrecognizable. The person you're holding on to isn't staying because they want to be with you. They're staying because leaving has become difficult. And you're not staying because the relationship is good. You're staying because the idea of them being with someone else, or you being without them, feels unbearable. What you're retaining isn't a relationship. It's control over a situation where you've already lost the thing that mattered. And the tighter you hold, the more obvious it becomes that you're not holding a partnership. You're holding a position you're too afraid to walk away from. Chronic suspicion after betrayal. Trust used to be your default. You met people and assumed good intentions until proven otherwise. You gave the benefit of the doubt. You took explanations at face value. And then someone you trusted completely betrayed you in a way that rewired how you process trust itself. Now, suspicion is automatic. You don't choose it. It just runs in the background, scanning for threats, inconsistencies, signs that you're about to be deceived again. Chronic suspicion after betrayal is the persistent state of distrust that remains long after the original violation. It's not limited to the person who betrayed you. It spreads. It becomes a filter you can't turn off, applied to everyone, reinterpreting neutral behavior as potential threat. The suspicion operates as pattern recognition gone hyperactive. Your mind learned that trust is risky, that people hide things, that what appears stable can collapse without warning. So now it's constantly checking, constantly testing. A message that takes too long to return feels like evasion. An explanation that's slightly vague feels like a lie. Normal friction in a relationship feels like the beginning of something worse. Someone cancels plans last minute. They have a reason, a legitimate one. But you don't fully believe it. You start wondering what the real reason is, whether they're avoiding you, whether this is the start of them pulling away. The suspicion doesn't need evidence. It generates its own through interpretation. Every ambiguity becomes confirmation that something's being hidden. A new partner is genuinely honest, transparent, available. But you can't accept it at face value. You look for the gap between what they say and what they do. You test them. Small traps to see if they'll lie. And when they pass, instead of relaxing, you assume they're just better at hiding things. The suspicion doesn't diminish with good behavior. It just adapts. A colleague makes a casual comment. Nothing hostile. But you analyze it. Was there subtext? Were they implying something? Are they building a case against you behind the scenes? The chronic suspicion turns normal workplace interaction into a field of potential threats. You're not working with people. You're working around them, waiting for the moment they reveal they can't be trusted. Chronic suspicion is exhausting. Not just for you, but for the people around you. Because they feel it. They feel your doubt, your testing, your inability to take their word, and that creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. The suspicion strains relationships. People start withdrawing because being constantly scrutinized is draining, and their withdrawal confirms what the suspicion predicted. See, they weren't trustworthy after all. The cruelty is that chronic suspicion doesn't protect you. It isolates you. It keeps you from forming the connections that would prove trust is possible. And every time someone fails to meet the impossible standard of proving they'll never betray you, the suspicion deepens. Until you're left in a world where everyone is a potential threat, and the safety you're searching for becomes impossible because the mechanism that's supposed to protect you is the thing keeping you alone. Loyalty testing. You don't trust their words anymore. Words are easy. Performance is easy. What you need is proof, so you create situations. Small tests. Scenarios where their loyalty gets measured without them knowing they're being tested. You tell them something confidential to see if it spreads. You create conflict to see whose side they take. You watch how they behave when they think you're not looking. The tests feel necessary. How else can you know if someone's really loyal? Loyalty testing is the deliberate creation of scenarios designed to evaluate whether someone will choose you, protect you, or prioritize you under pressure. It's not trust. It's verification through controlled provocation. And it transforms relationships into performance evaluations that the other person doesn't know they're taking. The testing works through manufactured pressure. You can't observe loyalty in neutral conditions. So you create conditions that force a choice. You see if they defend you when you're criticized. If they keep your secrets when sharing would benefit them. If they stay when leaving would be easier. Each test is designed to reveal whether their loyalty is real or conditional. You tell a friend something sensitive and mark it as confidential. Then you watch. If the information spreads, you know they failed. If it doesn't, they passed. But passing doesn't end the testing. It just means they passed that one. There's always another test, another scenario where their loyalty could falter. And you're always watching. You create a situation where a partner has to choose between you and something else. A conflict with a friend, a work opportunity that would create distance. You don't tell them it's a test. You just observe. And their choice becomes data. Did they prioritize you? Did they hesitate? Even if they choose you, the fact that they had to choose creates doubt. Real loyalty wouldn't require thought, would it? You put a colleague in a position where supporting you might cost them something. Then you see what they do. If they support you anyway, it's proof of loyalty. If they don't, it confirms what you suspected. They're only loyal when it's convenient. The test feels justified. You need to know who you can count on. But what you're actually doing is creating situations where failure is the only outcome that registers. Loyalty testing doesn't build trust. It erodes it, because the people being tested eventually realize they're being tested. They feel the scrutiny, the traps, the no-win scenarios where any choice will be interpreted as insufficient. And once they see it, the relationship changes. They're not trying to be loyal anymore. They're trying to pass tests. And that performance, that awareness that they're being evaluated, is exactly what the testing was supposed to detect. Except now you can't tell if their loyalty is real or if they're just managing your suspicion. And the testing continues, chasing proof that will never feel sufficient. Silent defection. They don't announce they're leaving. There's no confrontation, no final conversation. They just stop showing up the way they used to. Stop investing. Stop responding with the same energy. The relationship doesn't end in any formal sense. It just fades. And by the time you realize they've defected, they're already gone. Not physically, but in every way that matters. Silent defection is the quiet withdrawal from a relationship without explicit termination. It's not ghosting. They're still present, still responding, but the substance is gone. The connection has been severed internally, and they're just going through motions until the relationship dies from neglect. The defection works because it avoids accountability. Ending a relationship requires explanation, justification, potential conflict. Silent defection bypasses all of that. They don't have to defend their choice. They don't have to face your reaction. They just slowly reduce their participation until the relationship exists in name only. A friendship starts to thin. They're always busy. Plans get cancelled. Conversations get shorter. They're not hostile, just unavailable. You keep trying, keep reaching out, but the reciprocation isn't there anymore. Eventually, you realize you're the only one maintaining the connection. They defected months ago. You just didn't see it because it happened in increments. A partner becomes emotionally absent. They're physically present. They fulfill obligations, but the intimacy is gone. They've checked out. Mentally. Emotionally, they're staying because leaving is complicated. But they're not invested. They're not building. They're waiting for an exit that's clean enough to take. And in the meantime, you're in a relationship with someone who's already left. A team member stops contributing. They show up to meetings. They nod along. But the effort is gone. They're not invested in outcomes anymore. They've defected from the team but haven't formally quit. They're collecting a paycheck while contributing the minimum required to avoid getting fired. And the team suffers because they're operating as if this person is still engaged when they're not. Silent defection is cruel because it denies closure. You can't address what isn't acknowledged. You can't repair what the other person won't admit is broken. You're left in limbo, wondering if the relationship is salvageable or if you're clinging to something that's already dead. And the person who defected doesn't help you figure it out. They let you hold the weight of a connection they've already abandoned. Reputational damage through betrayal. The betrayal hurt. But what came after hurt more, because they didn't just walk away. They talked. They told their version, their side of the story. And in that telling, you became the villain, the unreasonable one, the one who caused the problems. And now, when people hear your name, they hear it through the filter of a narrative you didn't write and can't fully counter. Reputational damage through betrayal is the harm done to your social standing, professional credibility, or personal image as a consequence of someone else's misrepresentation following a violation. The betrayal is compounded by the strategic narrative control that follows, where the betrayer positions themselves favorably at your expense. The damage works through information asymmetry. The betrayer controls the story that circulates. They get to mutual contacts first. They frame the situation before you even know you need to defend yourself. And by the time you're aware of what's being said, the narrative has already set. Correcting it requires fighting against a version people have already internalized. An ex-partner spreads a version of the breakup that makes them the victim. They downplay or omit their betrayal. They emphasize your flaws, your reactions, your mistakes. Mutual friends hear their side. Some believe it entirely. Others stay neutral, which means they're operating with incomplete information that skews against you. Your reputation in that social circle is damaged not by what you did, but by what you're accused of doing in a story designed to protect them. A former colleague undermines your professional reputation after a conflict. They tell others you were difficult to work with. Unreliable. A problem. The specifics might be exaggerated or outright false, but they spread through professional networks. Now when your name comes up in certain circles, it carries a taint. Opportunities narrow. People approach you with caution. Not because of your actual work, but because someone successfully damaged how you're perceived. A family member tells their version of a conflict to other relatives. In their version, they did nothing wrong. You overreacted. You're the one who disrupted the family. And because they got to everyone first, your version sounds defensive. Like justification. The family dynamics shift. People treat you differently. Not because they investigated what happened, but because the first story they heard painted you as the problem. Reputational damage is hard to repair because correction requires more effort than the original lie. You can tell your side, but it sounds like retaliation. Like bitterness. The person who damaged your reputation doesn't have to prove their version was true. You have to prove it wasn't. And that burden is exhausting, especially when the people listening have already formed an opinion. What makes it unbearable is that betrayal becomes permanent in a way it wouldn't be otherwise. If they just betrayed you and left, the damage would be contained to the relationship. But by damaging your reputation, they extend the betrayal into your social world, your professional life, your family structure. The harm doesn't end when the relationship does. It lingers in how people see you, in opportunities you lose, in trust you have to rebuild with people who were never supposed to doubt you. Shared enemy bond betrayal. You bonded over a common threat, a difficult boss, a toxic family member, a shared frustration. That bond felt strong because it was built on solidarity. You were allies against something that made both of you vulnerable. And then the threat shifts. The dynamics change. And suddenly, the person you were allied with aligns with the very thing you were united against. They didn't just abandon the alliance. They joined the other side. Shared enemy bond betrayal is the violation that occurs when someone who bonded with you against a common adversary switches allegiance to that adversary, often using information or vulnerability you shared in confidence against you. The betrayal works through inversion. The bond you built was predicated on mutual opposition. You trusted them because they were on your side against a shared problem. That trust led you to share things, complaints, strategies, vulnerabilities. And those disclosures become weapons the moment they switch sides. Because now the person who knows your position, your frustrations, your tactics, is aligned with the very entity you were trying to navigate around. You and a coworker bond over frustration with management. You share openly. Vent, strategize. The solidarity feels real. Then management offers your coworker a promotion. Suddenly they're on the other side. And worse, they use what you shared to position themselves as the solution to the problem you were both complaining about. The trust you built through shared frustration becomes the mechanism of your exposure. You and a sibling unite against a difficult parent. You validate each other's experiences. Share coping strategies. It creates closeness. Then something shifts. The sibling reconciles with the parent. And in that reconciliation, they reframe the past. Minimize what happened. Suggest you're holding grudges they've moved past. The alliance that felt like protection becomes isolation. You're left holding a position alone that used to be shared. You bond with someone over a mutual dislike of a third party. That shared opposition creates intimacy. You confide in them. They confide in you. Then they reconnect with the third party. And suddenly, the things you said in confidence are being shared. Use as evidence that you're the problem. The bond that felt like loyalty was actually conditional. And the condition was that the shared enemy stayed an enemy. Shared enemy bonds are fragile because they're built on opposition rather than genuine connection. The alliance lasts as long as the threat does. The moment the threat changes or the incentives shift, the bond becomes negotiable. And when someone defects from that kind of alliance, the betrayal is amplified by the fact that they carry everything you revealed under the assumption of solidarity. The cruelty is that you can't rebuild, because the person who betrayed you now has access to the other side. They know what you said, what you think, what vulnerabilities you have, and they're in a position to use that information against you. The bond you thought was protection becomes the source of your exposure. Opportunistic betrayal. They weren't planning to betray you. It wasn't premeditated. They didn't wake up with a strategy. But then an opportunity appeared, something that would benefit them, and taking it required betraying you. And in that moment they calculated, weighed the relationship against the gain, and chose the gain. The betrayal wasn't personal. It was pragmatic, which somehow makes it worse. Opportunistic betrayal is the violation that occurs when someone exploits a situation for personal advantage at your expense, not because they intended to harm you, but because the cost-benefit analysis favored them and the opportunity was too convenient to pass up. The betrayal operates without malice. That's what makes it disorienting. They don't hate you. They're not trying to hurt you. They're just prioritizing their interests when those interests conflict with yours. And because there's no emotional charge behind it, no anger or vendetta, it's purely transactional. You were a variable in an equation, and the equation worked better without considering your position. A colleague takes credit for your idea in a meeting where doing so advances their career. They didn't plan it. But in the moment, the opportunity presented itself. The idea was there. The audience was there. And claiming it as theirs was easy. They made a split-second decision based on what served them. Your trust, your work, your reputation, all became acceptable costs for their advancement. A friend shares something you told them in confidence because it makes them look good in a conversation. They weren't trying to betray you. They just saw an opening. A moment where that information could elevate their status, make them seem more informed, more connected. And in that moment, your privacy mattered less than their social positioning. The betrayal was a byproduct of their opportunism. A business partner cuts you out of a deal because including you would reduce their share. It's not personal. It's just math. They can get more if you're not part of it. So they restructure. They renegotiate. They find a way to exclude you that's technically legal, technically justifiable. The relationship you built, the trust you invested, all become irrelevant the moment a better deal appears. Opportunistic betrayal is harder to process than malicious betrayal because there's no villain. They didn't betray you because they're bad. They betrayed you because they're self-interested. And self-interest is normal, expected, rational, which means the betrayal wasn't an aberration. It was a choice they'd make again under the same conditions, because the relationship wasn't a constraint on their behavior. It was just one factor among many, and when the circumstances aligned, it lost. What makes it cut deeper is the disposability it reveals. You thought the relationship had weight, that it carried obligations, that there were things they wouldn't do because it would violate the trust you'd built. But the opportunistic betrayal shows that those constraints were never as solid as you believed. They were conditional, situational, and when the situation changed, so did their willingness to protect what you thought you had together. Calculated betrayal. Every step was planned. The timing, the approach, the story they'd tell afterward. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a moment of weakness. It wasn't an accident that spiraled. They knew exactly what they were doing. They mapped out the consequences. They prepared for your reaction. They had contingencies. And they did it anyway, not despite the planning, but because of it. The calculation is what makes it cut deeper. Calculated betrayal is the deliberate, premeditated violation of trust with full awareness of the harm it will cause and strategic planning to minimize consequences for the betrayer. It's not impulsive. It's methodical. Every element is considered in advance, including how to manage the fallout. The calculation transforms betrayal into strategy. Impulse carries a kind of human messiness. Regret. The possibility that if they'd thought it through, they wouldn't have done it. But calculated betrayal removes that. They did think it through. They weighed the options. They decided your trust was worth less than what they'd gain by breaking it. And they executed that decision with precision. Someone plans to leave a partnership but doesn't tell you. Instead, they spend months quietly securing their exit, transferring assets, building alternative arrangements, positioning themselves so that when they finally leave, the damage lands almost entirely on you. They didn't just betray the partnership. They engineered the betrayal to maximize their advantage while you operated under the assumption that you were still building something together. A colleague systematically undermines you over time, not in one dramatic move. In small, strategic actions, they document your mistakes. They position themselves as the alternative. They build alliances that will matter when they make their move. And when the moment comes, when they finally act openly against you, it's not reactive. It's the culmination of a plan they've been executing for months. A partner plans an affair with precision. They don't stumble into it. They create the conditions. They establish alibis. They manage their digital footprint. They have answers ready for questions you haven't even asked. The affair isn't just a betrayal of intimacy. It's a demonstration that they've been lying with intention, maintaining two realities because they calculated that they could get away with it. Calculated betrayal doesn't leave room for the explanations that make betrayal easier to process. You can forgive weakness. You can understand impulse. But calculation. That requires accepting that someone looked at the relationship, looked at what they'd gained by betraying it, ran the numbers, and decided you were expendable. That coldness doesn't soften with time. It stays sharp. Because it wasn't about emotion. It was about outcome. And they got what they wanted. Emotional withdrawal as betrayal. Nothing technically ended. No one did anything objectively wrong. But you can feel it. The warmth is gone. The effort has stopped. The person who used to lean toward you now leans away. They're physically present but emotionally absent. And when you try to name it, when you point out the distance, they tell you you're imagining things. Nothing's changed. You're being paranoid. But you're not. The connection has been severed. They've just withdrawn so quietly that you can't prove it's happening. Emotional withdrawal as betrayal is the unilateral termination of emotional investment in a relationship while maintaining its external form. It's not dramatic. It's the slow removal of presence, warmth, an effort that transforms a living connection into a hollow structure. The withdrawal works because it's deniable. They're still there. Still responding. Still fulfilling basic obligations. But the substance that made the relationship real is gone. They're not giving you their thoughts anymore. Not sharing their internal world. Not investing emotional energy. They've checked out, but because they haven't left, you can't address it the way you could address a clear ending. A partner becomes a roommate. They're polite. Functional. But the intimacy is gone. Conversations stay surface level. Physical affection becomes mechanical or stops entirely. They're not engaging with you as a person anymore, just performing the minimum required to maintain the appearance of a relationship. And when you bring it up, they deny it. They're just tired. Stressed. You're overthinking. The withdrawal continues because naming it would require them to either recommit or leave, and they're choosing neither. A parent pulls back emotionally from a child. Not in ways that are obvious to outsiders. They still provide materially, still show up to events. But the emotional availability that used to be there has disappeared. The child feels it, tries to reconnect, gets surface-level responses. The withdrawal isn't explained. It's just a new reality the child has to navigate without understanding why the warmth left. A friend becomes distant. They don't cut contact, but the depth is gone. Conversations that used to flow now feel effortful. Support that used to be automatic now requires asking. The friendship exists in name, but the emotional investment has been withdrawn. And the friend never explains why. They just slowly reduce what they're willing to give until what remains is barely recognizable as the relationship it used to be. Emotional withdrawal betrays the implicit promise that relationships come with presence. Not just physical proximity, but emotional availability. When someone withdraws that without explanation, without negotiation, they're unilaterally redefining the relationship in ways the other person never agreed to. The betrayal isn't loud. It's quiet. A steady reduction of what you thought you had, done so incrementally that by the time you realize how much has been taken, it's already gone. Trauma bond rupture. The relationship was intense. Not in a healthy way. There was harm, chaos, cycles of hurt and reconciliation that created a bond deeper than logic could explain. You knew it wasn't good. But the intensity felt like connection. The pattern of rupture and repair created an attachment that felt unbreakable. And then it broke. Not gradually. Suddenly. Completely. And the loss doesn't feel like losing something bad. It feels like losing something essential, because the bond wasn't built on health. It was built on need, and trauma bonds don't release gently. Trauma bond rupture is the severing of an attachment formed through cycles of harm and intermittent reinforcement. It's not the end of a healthy relationship. It's the collapse of a bond that was never stable but felt inescapable. And the rupture creates withdrawal that mirrors addiction. The bond operates through intensity. Healthy relationships build on consistency. Trauma bonds build on extremes. The highs are euphoric. The lows are devastating. And that emotional volatility creates a neurological dependency. Your nervous system becomes calibrated to the chaos. When it ends, you're not just losing a person. You're losing the pattern your entire emotional regulation system adapted to. Someone in a toxic relationship finally leaves or gets left. The relationship was harmful. Everyone could see it, but the person trapped in it couldn't escape because the bond was wired through cycles of conflict and reconciliation. When it ends, relief doesn't come first. Withdrawal does. The longing, the inability to function, the intrusive thoughts about the person who hurt them. Because the bond wasn't rational, it was chemical, and breaking it creates symptoms that feel like dying even though leaving was the right choice. A child separates from an abusive parent in adulthood. The abuse was real. The decision to create distance was necessary. But the bond formed in childhood doesn't release just because it should. The child grieves not for what the parent actually was, but for the relationship they needed the parent to be. The rupture creates loss that's complicated by the fact that the thing being lost was never safe to begin with. Someone ends a friendship that operated through crisis. Every major connection moment was tied to drama, intensity, need. When the friendship ends, there's a void. Not because the friendship was healthy. Because it was the only thing that made them feel needed, connected, alive. The rupture leaves them without a coping mechanism they didn't realize they were dependent on. Trauma bond rupture is cruel because healing requires mourning something that hurt you. The loss is real even though the relationship was harmful. And people around you don't understand why you're struggling. They saw the damage. They wanted you to leave. They don't see that leaving doesn't immediately undo the bond. It just removes the source while the dependency remains, screaming for something that was never good but felt necessary to survive. Reconciliation ambivalence. They want to fix it. Or maybe you do. Or maybe you both do in theory. But in practice, reconciliation feels impossible. Not because the betrayal can't be addressed, but because even trying creates a split. Part of you wants to rebuild. Part of you knows that rebuilding might just be setting yourself up to be hurt again. And those two parts are locked in a stalemate. You can't fully commit to repair, but you can't fully commit to leaving. So you exist in a liminal space where the relationship is neither restored nor ended. Reconciliation ambivalence is the psychological state of being caught between the desire to repair a relationship after betrayal and the fear that repair will lead to further harm. It's not indecision. It's simultaneous commitment to incompatible outcomes. You want to trust them again and you know you can't. Both are true. Both are active. And they paralyze forward movement. The ambivalence operates through competing needs. You need safety. That requires distance. You need connection. That requires proximity. The betrayal made those needs irreconcilable. Closeness feels like risk. Distance feels like loss. And neither option resolves the underlying conflict. So you oscillate. One day you're ready to work on it. The next day you're ready to walk away. Neither decision sticks because both feel wrong. A couple tries to reconcile after infidelity. Some days progress happens. They talk. They're vulnerable. It feels like healing is possible. Other days the hurt resurfaces. The trust isn't there. The resentment is overwhelming. And the person who was betrayed can't tell if they're healing or just delaying the inevitable. The ambivalence keeps the relationship in suspension. Not fully together. Not fully apart. Just endlessly negotiating whether repair is even possible. A parent-adult-child attempt reconciliation after years of estrangement. The child wants a relationship. But they also remember why they left. Every attempt to reconnect triggers the old patterns. The parent promises change. Sometimes it seems real. Other times, it's clear nothing's different. The ambivalence leaves the child stuck. Trying feels exhausting. Not trying feels like giving up on something that might be salvageable. Neither choice brings peace. Friends try to rebuild after a betrayal. The friendship mattered. They both want it back. But the trust is fractured. Every interaction carries the weight of what happened. The betrayed friend can't fully relax. The betrayer can't fully prove themselves. The ambivalence makes every conversation feel like a test neither of them is passing. And eventually, the effort of reconciling starts to feel harder than the loss of just letting it end. Reconciliation ambivalence doesn't resolve through time. It resolves through decision. Either you commit to the risk of rebuilding, fully aware it might fail, or you commit to ending it, fully aware you might regret it. But staying in ambivalence, waiting for certainty that never comes, is its own form of suffering. You're not in the relationship. You're not out of it. You're just trapped in the exhausting space between trying and leaving, where neither feels safe enough to choose. Hyper-independence after betrayal. You don't ask for help anymore. You don't rely on anyone. You learn the lesson. Depending on people gets you hurt. So now you handle everything yourself. You don't share your problems. You don't let anyone close enough to have leverage. You're fine. You're capable. You don't need anything from anyone. And you tell yourself this is strength. But it's not strength. It's protection that's calcified into isolation. Because the betrayal didn't just teach you to be careful. It taught you that needing people is dangerous. So you stopped needing them. And now you're alone by design. Hyper-independence after betrayal is the defensive self-sufficiency that emerges when trust is violated. It's not healthy autonomy. It's the refusal to be vulnerable because vulnerability led to harm. The person becomes rigidly self-reliant not out of preference, but out of fear that depending on anyone will lead to another betrayal. The independence operates as armor. If you don't need people, they can't hurt you. If you don't share your struggles, they can't use them against you. If you don't let anyone support you, you can't be disappointed when that support disappears. The logic makes sense in the moment, but it creates a life where connection becomes impossible because connection requires some level of need. A need feels like exposure. After a partner betrays them, someone rebuilds their life entirely on their own. They don't date. They don't open up to friends. They handle their problems privately. They take pride in not needing anyone. And on the surface, it looks like resilience. Independence. But underneath, it's fear. The fear that if they need someone again, they'll be vulnerable again. And vulnerability led to devastation once. They can't risk it happening twice. After a friend's betrayal, someone stops confiding. They stay friendly, social, but they never share anything real. They don't ask for support. They don't offer opportunities for closeness. Every relationship stays surface level because depth requires trust, and trust feels like handing someone the tools to hurt you. The hyper-independence keeps them safe from betrayal. It also keeps them safe from connection. After a workplace betrayal, someone becomes intensely self-reliant professionally. They don't collaborate unless forced to. They don't share credit. They don't ask for help even when they need it. They'd rather struggle alone than risk, depending on someone who might use that dependence against them. The independence makes them effective in some ways. It also makes them isolated in ways that limit their growth and relationships. Hyper-independence after betrayal is a prison disguised as freedom. You're not choosing independence because it fits who you are. You're choosing it because it feels safer than the alternative. And while it protects you from future betrayal, it also protects you from future connection. The relationships you could have, the support you could receive, the intimacy that requires letting someone see your needs. All of that becomes inaccessible because the fear of being hurt again is stronger than the desire to be known. Trust reconstruction struggle. You want to trust again. You know you have to if you're going to have meaningful relationships. But every time you try, something stops you. A small inconsistency, a vague explanation, a moment where someone's behavior reminds you of the person who betrayed you. And suddenly, you're back in the same hypervigilant state, scanning for signs, looking for proof that this person will hurt you too. The trust you're trying to build keeps collapsing under the weight of the trust you lost before. Trust reconstruction struggle is the ongoing difficulty of rebuilding the capacity to trust after betrayal. It's not about trusting a specific person. It's about whether trust itself is safe. And when it's been weaponized against you, reconstructing it feels like trying to build on broken ground. The struggle operates through pattern recognition. Your mind learned that trust is risky. It cataloged the signs it missed before, the red flags it ignored. Now, it's hypervigilant. Every new relationship gets screened through the lens of the old betrayal. Does this feel familiar? Are they saying the things the last person said? Is this the beginning of the same pattern? The caution is rational, but it prevents trust from forming even when the new person hasn't done anything to warrant suspicion. Someone tries to date after a partner's betrayal. The new person is different, honest, transparent, but the person who was betrayed can't accept it. They're waiting for the other shoe to drop. They test. They question. They look for inconsistencies. And the new partner feels it. Feels the distrust that has nothing to do with them. The relationship struggles not because of what's happening now, but because of what happened before. Someone tries to rebuild professional trust after a colleague's sabotage. They need to collaborate. They need to delegate. But every time they try, anxiety floods in. What if this person uses the information against them? What if sharing makes them vulnerable? The struggle makes them overly cautious. Controlling. Unable to function in team environments because trust feels like risk they can't afford. Someone tries to reconnect with family after a betrayal by a family member. Other relatives want to rebuild. But the person who was betrayed keeps everyone at arm's length. Not because those relatives did anything wrong. Because the family structure itself feels unsafe. The trust that was broken with one person fractured trust in the whole system. Trust reconstruction struggle doesn't resolve through willpower. You can't just decide to trust and make it happen. Because trust isn't a decision. It's a feeling that builds through repeated reliability. And when betrayal has taught your nervous system that reliability is an illusion, that feeling doesn't come back easily. It requires time, patience, new experiences that slowly demonstrate that not everyone operates the way the person who betrayed you did. But even then, the struggle remains. A background hum of caution that never fully silences. A part of you that stays ready, just in case the trust you're building turns out to be another mistake.